There is a version of Gravity Falls that almost nobody has ever watched. A version made in Adobe Flash on a tight budget, where Dipper does not quite look like Dipper, where Stan looks like he wandered in from a completely different show, where Wendy is not a lumberjack's daughter at all, but a tree hugger whose whole personality is built around being the opposite of her father, and the whole thing runs for about 12 minutes inside what feels like a parallel universe copy of the first episode. For years, almost nobody outside the studio had seen it, and it is only one of the things this show quietly left behind. There are deleted scenes, scrapped episodes, songs cut from the finale for money, a love scene Disney threatened to delete itself, a statue buried in a forest in Oregon, a coloring book that vanished and came back, and a book of Bill Cipher's secrets that hides another book inside it. Tonight we are going through all of it, so get comfortable, settle in, we will be here a while, and if you have not subscribed to Pine Hat yet, it really does help us keep making these long, slow, hopefully sleep-friendly deep dives. We are going to take this gently, starting where the show itself almost did not start, in that strange unaired pilot, and drifting outward from there into the cuts and the scraps and the ghost episodes, the songs that were almost in the finale, the side stories that were almost canon, the real-world treasure hunt that almost did not end, and the secret rooms in the official books that fans have spent years quietly picking open. Nothing tonight is going to be hyped up. There is no twist ending. There is just a calm, careful look at the things Gravity Falls almost was, and the things it became without ever quite letting us see. So let us start with the pilot. Not the first episode, Tourist Trapped, which premiered on Disney Channel on June 15, 2012, and which most fans know by heart. We are talking about the version that came before that, the version made to convince Disney that this show should exist at all. Alex Hirsch had pitched Gravity Falls as a kind of cross between a summer camp memoir and a paranormal mystery box. He was very young, he had grown up sketching weird creatures in notebooks, and he had a clear vision of what he wanted, but a pitch is not a show. The network asked for a pilot. They wanted to actually see it before they signed on. So Hirsch and a small team put one together in Adobe Flash, on a budget that was, by Hirsch's own later admission, not at all what he wanted the show to look like. The pilot ran for roughly 12 minutes. It was a kind of compressed, dry run of the first episode, the story where the twins discover that the gnome they think is a strange forest creature is actually a small army of gnomes stacked on top of each other inside a trench coat, all chasing Mabel because they want her to be their queen. The bones of the joke are already there in the pilot. The summer camp framing is there, the mystery shack is there, Stan is there, but the surface of the thing is completely different. The most striking change, the one most fans notice right away, is the design. Stan in the pilot is far older, far more shrunken, far more of what fans of animation would call a gonk, a sort of ugly little gargoyle of an old man. He looks closer to a background character than the heart of the show. That design did not go entirely to waste. When Hirsch reworked Stan for the actual series, he kept the early sketch around, and he ended up reusing it for Mayor Befufftlefumpter, a tiny ancient man who appears in the background of various town events and dies in Season 2. So the original Stan, in a way, did get onto television. He just got demoted from main character to mayor, and he barely lived through the show. There is something quietly funny about that fact if you sit with it. The first version of Grunkle Stan did make it to the screen, but only as a kind of fossil. Dipper looks slightly off too. His hat is not quite right. The famous pine tree hat that ends up being more or less the show's logo did not exist yet. In the pilot, you can see Hirsch and his team feeling their way toward what Dipper should look like, and by most accounts, there were a lot of attempts at his hat before they landed on the simple blue cap with the tree on it, including one that gave him essentially a sea captain's hat. That sea captain version of Dipper would have changed the whole feel of the character. The pine tree hat reads as a kid pretending to be an adventurer. The sea captain hat would have read more as a costume, a deliberate bit. The fact that they pulled back from that is one of those tiny aesthetic decisions that you can trace all the way through to the show's identity. The hat is on the logo. The hat shows up in the credits. The pine tree symbol is one of Bill Cipher's symbols of the zodiac. None of that exists without the choice to keep Dipper's hat simple. Mabel in the pilot is recognizably Mabel, but the sweater is different. There are storyboards and early designs in which her sweaters are more of a baggy 90s sweater dress, with hairstyles that change from sketch to sketch. There was even an early idea where she would wear cowgirl boots as part of her everyday look. The decision to put Mabel in a different colorful sweater in nearly every episode is one of the most defining visual choices the show makes. because it means each episode visually feels like a new day in a real kid's summer. A new outfit, a new mood, a new idea pinned to her chest. That choice was not in place yet in the pilot. The grammar of Mabel was still being invented. You can see them feeling for it. Wendy is maybe the most interesting case, because the difference there is not just visual. In the actual series, Wendy is the cool, older teenager Dipper has a crush on, the daughter of Manly Dan the lumberjack, and there is a quiet running joke that Wendy has inherited a fraction of Manly Dan's intensity, a strain of toughness in her chill. In the pilot, Wendy is not a lumberjack's daughter at all. She is a tree hugger. The show's writers have said in interviews that the idea was for her to be a polar opposite of her father. The pilot makes her into a slightly different kind of cool kid. The kid who reads paperback beat poetry in the woods, who saves bugs, who feels offended on behalf of the forest. The final show keeps the cool, but redirects it into wilderness and weapons and casual recklessness. The pilot Wendy and the show Wendy share a vibe, but only one of them would ever throw an axe. There is one more buried gem in the early concept work that the pilot points to, and that is the idea of what Stan actually is. The show as broadcast, Stan turns out to be a con man hiding a much bigger secret about his brother and a portal in the basement. In the original concept for the series, before the show went into production, Stan was something else. As far as fans have pieced together from old interviews, he was meant to be the caretaker of the town's weirdness. The Mystery Shack was supposed to be a front, in the literal sense, a tourist trap that disguised the fact that Stan was quietly looking after the supernatural side of Gravity Falls. And his real goal across the run of the show was supposed to be finding a successor. He was meant to be searching, in Dipper or Mabel, for someone who could take over the role of Weirdness Keeper after he was gone. Which is why in that earliest version he plays oblivious to all the strange things the twins encounter. He is not actually oblivious. He is letting them encounter the strangeness on their own, so he can quietly assess them. That is a very different show from the one we got. It is a slower show, a quieter show, a more melancholy show. The version we got is, in a way, the same idea expressed sideways. Stan in the broadcast show is also testing them, also has hidden depth, and the question of who will inherit the journals does ultimately fall on Dipper. But in the earliest pitch, that mentor framing was meant to be the whole spine of the series. For a long time, the pilot itself was very nearly lost media. Hirsch hated the look of it. He hired his own animation team the moment the show was greenlit, and basically threw the Flash pilot in a drawer. For years, fans only had screenshots and secondhand descriptions. Then on August 3, 2016, the day after the Cipher hunt ended, the full pilot went online, as part of a prize for the people who had completed Bill's puzzle. It was a strange way to release a piece of lost media. You did not just get to watch it. You had to earn it, in a way, by being part of a community that had spent 2 weeks tearing through ciphers and traveling across the world to a real-life statue in Oregon. We will get to that part later, because Cipher Hunt is its own enormous chapter of lost media history. But it is worth pausing on the symmetry. The first version of the show, the version Hirsch was not proud of, the version that was almost embarrassing to release, was made the reward at the end of a real-world treasure hunt about the show's villain. That is a very Gravity Falls way to handle lost media. A high-definition release of the pilot also surfaced in April 2024, which came alongside the release of something else that for years had been considered lost. We will talk about that next, because alongside the pilot, Hirsch and his team had also made a fake trailer, a kind of pretend preview of episodes that did not exist yet, designed to convince the executives that the show had a long future ahead of it. That trailer is called The Next Time on Gravity Falls Reel, and for years it sat in the studio archives, mostly unseen, mentioned only in scattered interviews, until it was finally let out into the world. And once you understand what it actually was, the way the show eventually wrapped up looks slightly different in hindsight. The Next Time on Reel was, in its essence, a sales tool. Pilots are a tough sell to executives because they have to do too many jobs at once. They have to introduce the world, the characters, the tone, and the kind of stories the show will tell, all in one self-contained sample. What a network actually wants to know, though, is whether you can keep the show going, whether you have more ideas, whether what they are buying is a single episode or 100. So Hirsch and his small early team also put together a short fake trailer. It was about a minute long. It cut together brief glimpses of episodes that did not exist, snippets of characters and situations that had never been written, all stitched together to look as if they were being teased after a real episode of the show. The voiceover was the kind of breathless next week on tone that animated series use to keep kids tuning back in. It was an act of pure performance. It said, in essence, look how full of ideas we are. Look at all the things this show is going to be. By most accounts, Alex Hirsch confirmed the existence of the reel during a panel at Pixelatl in 2022. He described its purpose in those terms, as a way to give the executives a glimpse of a hypothetical season. But for a long time after that confirmation, the reel itself did not surface. People knew it existed, nobody had it. Then in April 2024, around 12 years after the show first aired, the full 1-minute Next Time on Gravity Falls reel was released, alongside a clean, high-definition release of the unaired pilot. It is a small piece of media in terms of running time, but as an artifact of the show's early life, it is genuinely fascinating, because it lets you see what Hirsch and his collaborators thought a hypothetical version of Gravity Falls would look like before they had figured out what the actual show was. Some of the things teased in the reel resemble episodes that did eventually get made. Some of them are clearly bits and gags that were invented purely for the trailer and were never going to become anything else. It is a reel of ghosts and possible futures. Picture a young animator sitting at a desk around 2010, cutting together a fake trailer for a show that does not exist yet, trying to make the future of that show feel inevitable. Stitching shots of characters whose voices have not been cast and whose stories have not been written into a teaser that does not announce any real episode. Selling a network on a phantom. That is, in a way, the original act of Gravity Falls lost media. The first piece of the show ever made was a piece of the show that was not real. The pilot and the reel together are interesting because they show you the negative space of Gravity Falls. They show you what the show would have looked like if it had been allowed to stay rough, if Hirsch had not insisted on rebuilding it from the ground up with a new team, if the network had said no, and the pilot had remained the only surviving artifact of an unmade Disney mystery cartoon. There is a universe somewhere, in the spirit of Mabel's multiverse arc, where the pilot is the entirety of Gravity Falls, where the only Stan is the gonk, the only Wendy is the tree hugger, the only Dipper is the one without his hat figured out, and they live forever in 12 minutes of low-budget Flash. We do not live in that universe, but we can watch it. The most heartbreaking corner of Gravity Falls' lost media, though, is not the pilot. It is the small graveyard of episodes that never got made at all. The show was only 2 seasons, 40 episodes. That is, by any measure, a small body of work. And yet, inside that small body of work, there is the ghost of a much larger one. A run of episodes that were pitched, drafted, broken out in a writer's room, sometimes even storyboarded in part, and then never produced. Some of them died for very simple reasons. The show was ending. There was no time. Some of them died because the writers could not crack them. And one of the strangest, one of the most quietly beautiful of them, only became publicly known years after the show ended, when one of the writers shared a sketch from it on social media as a kind of farewell to an idea he had never quite been able to let go of. That sketch is from an episode that fans now refer to as Wendy's on the Road. It was an idea kicked around for an unproduced Wendy-focused episode, and it was tweeted out by Michael Rianda, who was a writer and creative director on the show, several years after Gravity Falls had ended. Rianda described it, in his own words, as his favorite of the various Wendy episode pitches the team tried to crack. The premise was very Wendy. She gets her hands on a copy of Jack Kerouac's novel On the Road. She becomes consumed by the wanderlust the book romanticizes. She starts to feel, in that very teenage way, that there is a real life happening somewhere out there beyond Gravity Falls, and that everything around her is just a kind of waiting room before that real life starts. The episode would have used that pull on her as its emotional engine. It was meant to be about the part of teenage life that the rest of the show only ever lets you see in glimpses. It was about Wendy looking past Gravity Falls, towards something else. The team never quite cracked it, in Rianda's account. There was something about it that did not click into a workable episode. So it was set aside, and it has remained set aside ever since. It exists now only as a sketch and a memory and a tweet. But it is on a list, in fans' heads, of the kind of show Gravity Falls might have been if it had had one more season to grow into. Another planned episode that floats through the fan record, mentioned by writers and crew across various interviews and panels, is one tentatively called Silence of the Hams. It would have appeared, by most accounts, in the second half of the second season. The actual content of the episode has never been described in detail in any official source that can be confirmed. What survives of it is mostly the title and the general acknowledgement that it was on the slate at one point. The title alone tells you something about the tone the show was still chasing late in its run, that knowing pun, that suggestion of a parody, that lean towards spoof horror in the way the original Silence of the Lambs would let you do. It is not hard to imagine what the show might have done with that premise, but anything beyond the title is speculation, and we are going to leave it as that. There are other unmade episodes that float around in interviews and DVD commentaries, most of them not so much fully developed scripts as pitches that got far enough into the writer's room to have a name and a hook before they were set aside. The general picture is consistent. The show ended sooner than the writers wanted it to end. Hirsch, who is on record about this in several interviews, has said that the choice to end Gravity Falls after 2 seasons was creative. He felt the story he wanted to tell had a natural shape, a beginning and a middle and an end, and that running on past that would have damaged what the show was. He wanted to leave the table with food still on it rather than overstay his welcome. So the show ended in 2016, after 40 episodes, while the writers still had pitches in their pockets. Those pitches were not killed because they were bad. They were killed because there was no room for them. The show had to land, and it had to land cleanly. Among the various references and commentaries and interviews to ideas that were considered and abandoned is the early concept for the episode that ended up being Double Dipper. In its original form, the writer's room was working with a version where Dipper actively disliked parties and spent the whole episode trying to sabotage Mabel's party at the Mystery Shack. In one early version of that idea, Dipper, in his frustration, was even going to summon Bill Cipher. Bill, in that version of the story, would have been introduced very differently. He would have walked into the show not as Stan's enemy or Ford's old nemesis, but as the secret weapon of a sulking preteen who hated his sister's social life. The writers eventually concluded that the version of Dipper that storyline produced was completely unlikable. He came off as a brat. Worse, he came off as the kind of brat audiences would not stay attached to over the course of a series. So they cut the Bill summoning out, the active sabotage out, and reworked the episode into the clone story we all know, where Dipper accidentally creates a small army of copies of himself in an attempt to manage too many tasks at once during the party. The episode is still about Dipper being a slightly anxious mess at a social event. It is just not about him doing something unforgivable. That choice ripples through the whole show. Bill Cipher's actual introduction in the Season 1 episode Dreamscaperers is one of the most carefully calibrated entrances in the entire series. He arrives inside Stan's mind, in a dream, summoned by Gideon. He flirts with the camera, he makes deals, he flashes his eye, and then he leaves. The whole presentation lands because it is the first time we see him, and because of how the show structures the moment around him. If he had been introduced inside a Double Dipper plot as a tool for Dipper to sabotage a party, the audience would have met him in a context that softened him. The writer's instinct to pull him out of that early draft is one of those decisions that, in retrospect, looks like the show's spine setting itself. A similar story is buried in the production history of Into the Bunker, the second episode of Season 2. That episode was, by several accounts from the writers, designed specifically to rescue Wendy. Not from in-show danger, but from the position she had ended up in by the end of Season 1. The Dipper Crush plot had run its course. The writers felt that Wendy in Season 1 had been too much a static love interest, and they wanted to repair her. So they wrote Into the Bunker as an episode that would let her behave as an action hero, that would put her in a dangerous monster hunting situation alongside Dipper and Mabel and Seuss, and that would resolve the romantic tension in a clear, mature way. The episode is, in effect, a course correction. It exists because the writers were unhappy with what the show had done to Wendy, the Wendy of Season 2 onwards. The Wendy who throws axes, who survives Weirdmageddon, who treats Dipper as a younger friend rather than a younger admirer, comes out of that decision. The earlier Wendy, the version of her that we briefly had in Season 1, is in a sense lost media too. She is not gone, exactly, because she is still on the screen in those early episodes, but she is the ghost of a different design choice. The writers buried her in the second season. The same is true for Pacifica, who in Season 1 is essentially a cardboard mean girl, a foil to Mabel, and a stand-in for everything snobby and entitled. Northwest Mansion Mystery, the 10th episode of Season 2, is the show's deliberate attempt to repair her. The writers gave her abusive parents, gave her a real internal life, gave her a chance to stand up to her family, and used a ghost story to externalize her family's literal historical sins. The Pacifica that exists after Northwest Mansion Mystery is again a kind of new Pacifica, and the Season 1 Pacifica is, by extension, an early version of a character the show later rewrote. The show has a quiet pattern of doing this. It tries a character, it does not love what it has made, and it writes them into a corner where they can come out the other side as something more honest. The earliest drafts of these characters, the versions in the first season, are not exactly cut content, but they are forerunners that the show chose to grow past. They feel adjacent to lost media, because they are the originals you can no longer go back to. But the single most famous unproduced piece of Gravity Falls is something that would have happened after the actual finale ended. The writers, in commentaries and interviews, have described in detail a planned epilogue that never got made. The shape of it is very Gravity Falls. After Weirdmageddon is over, after Bill is gone, after the town has been restored and the summer is ending, Dipper and Mabel are in their bedroom, packing. They are about to leave. They are saying goodbye to a place that has shaped them. And then Blendin Blandin appears. Blendin, the time agent who has appeared throughout the show in various comic and serious capacities, would come back to warn them about a strange after effect of the war against Bill. There are, he tells them, time anomaly bubbles still drifting around Gravity Falls. Loose pockets of reality where past and present have not finished sorting themselves out. He wants to keep them safe. He wants to make sure they get out of town clean. But the twins, of course, end up wandering into one of those bubbles by accident. And the bubble takes them back to the first day they ever arrived in Gravity Falls, the day before the events of Tourist Trapped. The version of Dipper and Mabel that the bubble holds is the version that has not yet experienced any of this. They are kids who do not want to be here. They are kids who are bored, who are scared, who have not yet met Seuss, who do not yet love Stan, who do not know about the journals, who do not know about Ford, who do not know what the summer is going to give them. The epilogue would have let the twins, the ones we know, watch their younger selves on that first day and feel in real time how far they had come. The whole thing was meant to be a quiet, reflective coda, a way to say goodbye not just to the characters in their world, but to the audience that had grown with them. A way to remind everyone, including the twins themselves, that Gravity Falls had changed them. It was cut. The reasons for the cut, as Hirsch and others have described them, were partly practical and partly creative. There simply was not the room or the time to make a follow-up episode. The shape of the finale, the multi-part Weirdmageddon block, had taken up the back half of the second season. The show had to end. And there was, in the writer's room, a sense that the actual goodbye in the finale, the goodbye on the bus, the goodbye between the twins and Stan and Ford, was strong enough on its own. The epilogue would have been a beautiful piece of writing, but it would have softened the impact of the finale's last scene. It would have been a curtain call after the audience had already started clapping, so Hirsch made the call. They left the curtain down. The epilogue stayed in the writer's room. Blendin's final appearance, in the version of the show that exists, is not the warning he was meant to give. It is something else. That epilogue is one of the most painful pieces of Gravity Falls lost media, because it is not just a deleted scene, it is a deleted experience. There is an entire emotional beat the audience was going to feel that no audience has ever felt. There is a version of you who watched that episode after the finale, who saw Blendin appear in the twins' bedroom, who watched the twins step into the bubble and see their younger selves, who felt the whole show fold up into a single quiet hug. That version of you does not exist. The show ended without it. But because Hirsch and the team have talked about the idea so openly, the absence of it has become part of the show's mythology. We know what we missed. We have learned to feel the shape of it. And there is something quietly fitting about that, given that the show is itself, more than anything, about the bittersweet act of becoming aware of what you are about to lose. The epilogue is a perfect ghost. The show stopped right before it could happen. We have spent the years since reading commentary about it, the way you might read the obituary of a friend you never met. There were other small pieces of cut content tied to the finale that we will get to in their own time. There was a song called It's Gonna Get Weird that was originally going to be sung by Bill across the early part of Weirdmageddon, and which was cut for time. There was a longer version of the live-action sequence in the first part of Weirdmageddon, in which Jason Ritter and Linda Cardellini, the voice actors who played Dipper and Wendy, got to react to suddenly being in their real adult bodies. and which was cut almost entirely so that only a few seconds of them on screen survived. There were small bits of dialogue and atmosphere shaved away from various episodes simply because the 11-minute and 22-minute runtimes of Disney's standard slots are unforgiving. We will work our way through those in the next part of the night. But the planned epilogue stands above all of them, because it is the only deleted thing in Gravity Falls that was meant to come after the show was over. And there is one more thing worth saying about the unproduced episodes before we move on, which is about the way the show's writers have continued to talk about them. There is no bitterness in the way Rihanna described the Lost Wendy episode. There is no resentment in the way Hirsch describes the cut epilogue. There is something closer to fond regret. The writers know which children they could not save. They have been honest about it. And that honesty, in interviews and in commentaries and in occasional sketches posted years later, has given the fans a kind of partial closure. We know enough about the ghost episodes to dream the rest. That is part of what keeps Gravity Falls feeling alive even years after it ended. It has gaps in it. The gaps are described. We get to fill them in our heads. Now let us move into the cut scenes themselves. The deleted material that did exist, at least in storyboard or in script, and that has been spoken about in commentaries, in DVD extras, in panels, on social media, and in the documents that have leaked or been formally released over the years. There is a surprising amount of this. The complete series box set that Shout Factory put out in 2018 contains over an hour of deleted scenes from Season 2 alone. The commentary tracks on that box set, which Hirsch and various writers and voice actors recorded together, contain endless asides about scenes that were cut, jokes that got nixed, fights with the censors that ended in compromises. Some of those commentaries even have parts of their audio missing, because Hirsch and his guests said things that Disney did not want preserved in the final product. Hirsch has occasionally hinted that he would one day like to release uncensored versions of those commentaries. But for now, what survives is a strange artifact in itself. A series of commentary tracks with quiet little holes in them, where the audio cuts out and then comes back, with the cast already talking about something else. The most famous single cut scene in the entire run of Gravity Falls is the one that almost was not cut. It is the one from the Season 2 episode The Love God, which premiered in 2015. The episode is named for a strange, unsettling man who introduces himself as a love god, who claims to be able to bring people together with his magic. He is, in the way the show plays him, a slightly grimy bohemian figure with real reality-bending power, and Mabel ends up trying to use his magic to fix her friends Candy and Grenda after she accidentally ruins their love lives. The episode is, at its heart, about how forcing love to happen makes it crooked. It is also, behind the scenes, the place where Alex Hirsch had one of his most public fights with Disney's Standards and Practices department, and the place where he came closest to losing one of those fights. The story has been told in detail by Hirsch himself in various interviews and tweet threads. The original script for The Love God contained a scene in a diner in which the Love God's magic ripples through the room and causes a string of small, cute, easy little couples to form. The script described in fairly neutral terms a few random couples in a diner falling in love through the power of his magic. One of the storyboard artists working on the episode, when she got to that scene, made one of those couples two lovable elderly women, two grandmothers in a booth, suddenly looking at each other and falling in love. Hirsch, in his telling, thought the scene was sweet. He thought it was casual. He thought it was the kind of throwaway gag that the show could absolutely do. He also, he admits, knew that the moment Disney's censors saw it, they were going to flip out. And so, by his own account, he decided to leave it in to see what would happen. What happened was exactly what he had expected. The notes came back almost immediately. Please revise. That was the standard phrasing of the censor's note. Please revise. And Hirsch sent back a single word in response, which has since become one of the small folk heroic stories of Disney Channel animation. He wrote, "Why?" He did not write a paragraph. He did not write a defense. He wrote one word in lowercase. And by his own description, that one-word answer essentially broke the censors. The negotiations that followed went on for a long time. The final outcome, after months of back and forth, was that Disney told Hirsch in very clear terms that he could either change the scene himself or they would cut it out of the episode entirely. Hirsch, in the end, changed it. The version of the diner scene that survives in the aired episode of The Love God still has the Love God's magic rippling through the diner, but the elderly women are no longer there as a couple. The pairing was rewritten. That cut scene is, in a sense, lost media in the most direct way. It exists in storyboards. It exists in the writer's memories. It exists in the public record of Hirsch's interviews. It does not exist in the aired episode. It is missing from the show. And the absence of it has taken on a kind of weight in the years since, as standards on what animated kids' shows can and cannot show have shifted, and as later Disney shows have included the kind of casual queer relationships that Gravity Falls was not allowed to include. There is now a regular thread in the fan conversation about Gravity Falls, in which fans note that the show would, if it had been allowed to air a year or two later, have shown the two elderly women in love. The Love God scene is the version of Gravity Falls that almost was, the version that the censors stopped at the last minute, the version that a single word from Hirsch could not save. The same episode contains another small piece of censored content that fans have cataloged. The Love God's necklace, in the original design, was, by most accounts, a trans symbol, the small interlinked male and female symbols that have come to be associated with transgender identity. In the final design that aired, the necklace was changed. The symbols were changed to a heterosexual pairing. That is a smaller change, in a sense, because it is a piece of costume design rather than a scene, but it is part of the same pattern. The show was trying, in its small ways, to include and acknowledge queer characters. The censors, in their small ways, were sanding those acknowledgments off. The Love God we got is, in his necklace and in his diner, a more carefully neutralized version of the character the writers had been trying to put on screen. The fight over the Love God is the most famous example, but it is not the only one. Hirsch has, in interviews and on social media, shared a string of standards and practices notes from across the run of Gravity Falls that show just how strange the process of writing for Disney Channel could be. In one of those threads, he released several of the actual emails the censors had sent him. Among the words and phrases that the censors objected to were poop face, which one would imagine speaks for itself. They objected to the word Lucifer, on the grounds that it would generate religious complaints. They objected to a gag in which a basketball player throws a chimp through a hoop, on the grounds that audiences would be upset by it. They objected to a use of the word Kentucky, on the grounds that, in their words, it would lead to unsavory rhymes being made up by viewers. They objected to the use of the word crud, on the grounds that the word had an inappropriate slang definition. Some of these read as comic, some of them read as poignant. The collected document, which Hirsch posted in a thread around the show's 10th anniversary, is a kind of catalog of small skirmishes that the show fought constantly, in the margins of every script. The version of Gravity Falls that exists is, in a way, a heavily filtered version of the show that was originally being written. It is not the case that the show was full of poop faces and Lucifers and Kentuckys, and that someone wisely trimmed them out. It is the case that the writers had to fight, line by line, to keep the show feeling like a show that adults could enjoy alongside children. The lost content, in this sense, is not always a scene. Sometimes it is a single word, a single small idea, a single rude phrase that a writer wanted to include, and that a censor's note removed. Hirsch's overall reaction to the censor notes, judging by the way he has talked about them publicly, is half exasperated and half affectionate. He has joked about having thousands of these notes. He has joked about being a kind of accidental anthropologist of corporate animation censorship. But he has also, in interviews, taken the time to point out the cases where the censors were obstructing things he thought were important. The Love God case is the obvious one. There are others. There is, scattered through commentaries, mention of small jokes and small dramatic moments that were softened to comply with notes. None of it adds up to a separate version of the show. All of it adds up to a faint, persistent watermark of compromise. Now let us walk through the other deleted scenes that have surfaced, scene by scene, episode by episode. We will go in roughly chronological order, because that is the easiest way to keep them in your head as you listen. In the third episode of Season 1, Headhunters, which is the Wax Museum episode, there were several cutscenes that have been cataloged either in storyboards released to the wiki or in commentaries. One was a small establishing gag involving the Wax Museum's security guard, who would lock the building up with a comically elaborate set of locks before walking away and leaving a window open. That kind of joke is very Gravity Falls. It is the show showing you that the supposedly safe institutions of the town are run by people who are absent-minded at best and outright incompetent at worst. The Wax Museum is also where the show first quietly starts establishing that the adults are not really in charge of anything. In another deleted moment from the same episode, there are storyboards in which Lazy Susan, the local diner waitress, has her mind erased and is tricked into donating to a society. There are members of that society in the storyboards expressing concerns that the society is abusing its power before they themselves have their minds wiped. None of that was in the final cut. What is interesting about that material is what it implies about the show's earliest plans for what we now know as the Blind Eye Society. The Blind Eye, the cult of memory erasers led by Old Man McGucket, is one of the great late show reveals. They are introduced and revealed across Season 2, when the journals and the history of Gravity Falls open up. But these cut Headhunters storyboards suggest that the writers had a much earlier version of that society in mind, or at least something adjacent to it, very near the beginning of the show. The Wax Museum was originally going to be a place where a memory-erasing society quietly operated. The version of the show that aired pulled that thread out, saved it for later, and recontextualized it as something with deeper roots when it finally surfaced. That choice is a quiet example of how the show kept rewriting its own past. In the 7th episode of Season 1, Double Dipper, we already touched on the major cut content, which is the bill-summoning sabotage version of the episode. The version that exists, the Clone Army version, has its own much smaller deleted scene catalog. There are small bits of clone Dipper material that were trimmed for time. The clones, in some early versions of the script, had more developed personalities. The number 5 clone, who in the final episode is barely a side character, had more screen time in early drafts. None of those deletions reshaped the episode. They are the kind of small edits that any sitcom format kids show goes through in the back half of production. They are mentioned in commentary mostly as fond memories. In the Season 1 episode The Inconveniencing, which is the convenience store ghost episode, and is one of the earlier episodes in which Dipper and Wendy's friendship is developed in detail, fans have for years pointed at the scene in which Dipper sees Wendy with her hair in the wind, realizes that she is beautiful, and then snaps out of it and finishes their high five. That moment in the episode is short. There have long been suggestions, in the fan record and in scattered comments from production staff, that an earlier version of the scene played the moment longer, or framed it differently. The published version of Journal 3, the official book that Hirsch wrote in the show's voice, contains a small note attributed to Dipper saying that he did, at some later party, finally get to dance with Wendy. That detail is not in the show, it is in the book. It is a small piece of Dipper and Wendy's friendship that the show as broadcast left to the books to pick up. It is not exactly a cutscene, but it is a piece of canon that did not make it on screen, and it sits in roughly the same emotional category. It is the show holding something back and giving it to you in a different format. The first season finale, Gideon Rises, has its own corner of cut material. There were extended versions of the giant Gideon bot rampage that had to be shortened for time, and a number of small character beats inside the Mystery Shack scenes that were cut to keep the runtime manageable. None of that material has been formally released, but it has been described in commentaries. The episode, even in its final form, is one of the most densely plotted in the first season, and you can feel it move at speed. The deletions are the corners that got shaved to keep it tight. In the second season, the deleted scene archive begins to become more substantial. Seuss and the Real Girl, the 5th episode of Season 2, the one about the haunted dating sim, has a known deleted scene set at Hoo Ha's, the local pizza arcade. In that scene, Stan sits at a table inside Hoo Ha's and comes up with the idea of stealing the animatronic from the venue. The scene plays out as a kind of mini-comic beat between Stan and a pair of animatronic talking heads on the wall. It is the kind of moment that the show often cuts when runtime is tight, because the plot of the episode is already proceeding without it. The animatronic eventually does end up at the Mystery Shack in the final episode, but the deleted scene gives Stan's heist a slightly more on-screen origin than it has in the aired version. The same episode has a known regional cut. When it aired in the Philippines, the scene where the dating sim's animatronic body melts and leaves only the metal skeleton was cut, presumably because local broadcast standards judged it too frightening for children. That cut is a piece of regionally lost media. There are people who first saw Seuss and the Real Girl in the Philippines who do not, even now, know that scene exists. The 8th episode of Season 2, Blendin's Game, has a number of small deleted lines and moments that surface mostly in the box set extras. The same is true for the 10th, Northwest Mansion Mystery. The deletions are mostly atmospheric. They do not change the shape of the episodes, but they often shave off small grace notes that the writers had wanted to include. There is, in particular, in Northwest Mansion Mystery, mention in the cut content of additional bits of Pacifica's interaction with her parents. including small lines that would have made her parents' coldness even more explicit. The aired version is already enough. The cut version was, by some accounts, even sharper. The 11th episode of Season 2, Not What He Seems, is the episode where the show's whole architecture changes. Stan reveals that he has been hiding a portal in the basement. He activates it, ignoring his great-niece and great-nephew's pleas, and the figure who steps out at the end is a man we do not yet know, but who looks very much like Stan. That episode is, by general agreement, one of the most carefully constructed pieces of plot mechanics the show ever did. It also, like the rest of the second season, has small deletions documented in the box set. None of those deletions changes the central reveal. What they do, in a way, is provide a few more pieces of breath in an episode that otherwise sprints from one beat to the next. The episode that follows, A Tale of Two Stans, is the show's first proper backstory episode, and it is one of the most heavily affected by deletions, because the backstory it tells, the story of Stan and Ford and Philbrick and their childhood in Glass Shard Beach, contains a lot of material that the writers wanted to include and could not. There is a deleted scene involving both Stan and Ford adjusting their glasses at the same moment, which was fully animated. That scene only appeared, briefly, in the trailer Disney released at San Diego Comic-Con in 2015 for the second half of Season 2. It is one of the small twin bond beats that the show as broadcast does not get to make. There were several cut montages of Stan and Ford growing up that did not make it into the final episode, including a scene of them watching a movie on TV and a scene of them making shadow puppets in class. There is a cut storyboard of the two of them as very young children watching television one night together, shirtless and eating food, in the kind of universal little kid setup that families recognize instantly. Even more interesting are two deleted moments revealed, as far as fans have pieced together, by S.H. Coutinho, one of the show's writers, in 2023. Coutinho shared, in a post on social media, a deleted scene in which a young Ford notices mermaids in the lake and plays with them. The moment was meant to be the show's first signal that the strange creatures of Gravity Falls were already present in Ford's life before the journal was started. Coutinho also described another deleted Ford moment in which Ford, walking home from the store, notices a traffic light creature that changes the lights of the town's traffic system. That detail is one of those tiny pieces of world building that the show does best, the kind of cryptid that lives in the everyday infrastructure of the town, and it is in some ways one of the saddest small deletions, because it is the kind of detail that would have made the universe of Gravity Falls feel a little more woven. Both of those scenes, according to Coutinho's account, were cut purely for time. They were not cut because anyone disliked them. They were cut because there was no minute left in the episode to hold them. Sock Opera, the fourth episode of Season 2, is the episode where Bill Cipher possesses Dipper's body and uses it to try to steal the journal away. The cutscene archive for that episode is, in fan accounts, a goldmine. There were several extended moments of characters reacting to Bill and Dipper's body, of Bill making ominous statements while wearing Dipper's face, of Bipper, the fan-coined nickname for the possessed Dipper, expanding on his own twisted logic. Most of those moments did not survive into the final cut. The reason, by the writer's own accounts, was that they elaborated on character but did not strictly advance the plot, and a 22-minute Disney Channel episode does not give you very much room. The result is that the version of Bipper we got, which is itself one of the most disturbing things the show ever broadcast, is a heavily compressed version of the Bipper the writers had originally drafted. There is, in a corner of the script and the storyboards, a longer, slower, more uncomfortable version of that possession. The aired version sprints through it. Storyboards from that scene survive, and at least one of them has been released. The rest is in folders somewhere in the studio. There is also a quieter detail in Sock Opera that is sometimes filed alongside cut content even though it stayed in the episode, which is the moment when Mabel realizes Dipper has been replaced and decides not to surrender the journal. The original draft of that scene played it slightly differently. It was longer, and it was about Mabel weighing her own dreams of the puppet show against her brother's safety in a way that was clearer in language. The aired version compresses it into a wordless sequence of glances. That compression is, by general agreement, one of the show's strongest editorial decisions. It would have been weaker if it had been more explicit. The cut version is in the folder. The aired version is the one people remember. In the 14th episode of Season 2, The Stanchurian Candidate, the show stages a mayoral race in Gravity Falls and uses it as the platform for Stan's campaign. The episode is densely written and has its share of cut material, including small political gags that did not survive into the final cut. The most often cited cut in the commentaries is a moment that would have given Dipper's hat a slightly more prominent role in the mayoral test. The mayoral requirements in the episode are themselves a small running joke, where candidates have to perform a set of strange ritual tasks, including casting a shadow, counting to 10, and throwing a hat into a hoop. The earlier version of that joke had Stan throwing a different hat. The change to Dipper's hat in the aired version was a script edit that gave the episode one more small twin bond moment. The cut version of the joke is mentioned in passing in the commentary, but the storyboards have not been formally released. The Last Mabelcorn, the 15th episode of Season 2, also has deletions, although the box set notes specifically that no formal deleted scenes from this episode are included in the release. The episode is, on its own, one of the show's more emotionally compressed pieces, the one in which Mabel goes looking for unicorn hair and ends up in a small ethical war with a magical horse. There are commentary references to small bits of that ethical war that were trimmed for time. None of them have been formally released. They sit in the same category as much of the Mabelcorn material that did not survive into the final cut, in folders, in storyboards, in private studio drives. The deleted scene archive of the second half of Season 2 also includes the most important and most discussed cut material in the show, which is the material attached to the Weirdmageddon trilogy, the three-part finale block that closes out Gravity Falls. That material is rich enough that it deserves its own pass. Let us walk into it slowly. Weirdmageddon, the three-part climax that closes out Gravity Falls, is one of the most dense pieces of television in the show's whole run. The first part premiered on Disney XD on October 26, 2015. The second part, Escape from Reality, aired a few weeks later, on November 23, 2015. The third part, Take Back the Falls, aired as a roughly 44-minute special on February 15, 2016, and it is the actual series finale. Together, the three parts had to land everything the show had been building. Bill's invasion, Stan and Ford's reunion as adults, Dipper and Mabel's relationship as the summer ended, the fates of every minor character, the meaning of the journals, the meaning of Stan's con, and the meaning of Ford's exile. It is a lot to land in 3 episodes, and in order to land it cleanly, the writers had to cut a lot. The most famous Weirdmageddon cut is the song. The original draft of the first Weirdmageddon episode included a musical number sung by Bill across the early parts of his invasion, titled It's Gonna Get Weird. The song was meant to be Bill's victory lap. It was meant to be the moment Bill enjoyed himself most. He would sing it as he was redecorating the town, as he was creating impossible geometry over the streets, as he was turning his friends from across dimensions into the bodyguards of his new throne. It would have been the show's first proper villain song. Hirsch and his team developed the number far enough that the writer's room can describe it in detail. The song was cut for time. The decision is one that the writers, in commentary, sound conflicted about. There is a version of the show in which Bill gets a song. There is a version in which the audience watches him sing his own takeover as a literal musical performance. That version was cut, almost entirely. What survives is the song's existence in the historical record, and the small acknowledgement, in interviews, that the songs Bill does sing in the final cut were salvaged from the larger piece. Another famous Weirdmageddon cut is the one that nearly did not happen at all. The final episode of the show, Take Back the Falls, ends with the song We'll Meet Again, performed by Vera Lynn. The song plays over the slow montage of the show's farewell, of Bill's defeat, of Stan's restored memory, of Mabel's last summer day. It is one of the most emotionally devastating uses of a song in any animated series of the era, partly because the song itself is so old. We'll Meet Again is a wartime song from 1939, originally performed by Vera Lynn as a kind of promise to the soldiers who were going off to fight in World War II, and to the families they were leaving behind. The song carries, in its melody and in its lyrics, the entire history of British and American audiences saying goodbye to people they were not sure they would see again. It is a deeply specific piece of music. It has been used, perhaps most famously, at the end of Dr. Strangelove. It carries a weight that no original song could have carried in the same way. The use of We'll Meet Again at the end of Gravity Falls was, by the writer's own account, exactly the right choice. It was also, by their own account, almost cut, because the license to use it cost a substantial amount of money. Hirsch revealed at MomoCon in 2017 that Disney had originally wanted to cut the song from the finale because of how much it cost to clear. The show's budget, by the time the finale was being mixed, was tight. The cost of licensing Vera Lynn's recording was, by Disney's accounting, larger than they were happy to spend. There was a real possibility, at one point in the post-production process, that the finale was going to end with a different song. Hirsch fought hard for We'll Meet Again. He believed in it. He thought the show could not end without it. In the end, Disney let him keep it, and the finale closes on Vera Lynn's voice over the last quiet shots of Gravity Falls. The world that we got to see is the version in which the song stayed. The version in which the song was cut is one of the strangest possible alternate universes of the finale. We have never heard what the show's farewell sounds like without Vera Lynn. It is hard, even to think about it, not to feel something like a small chill. The third major piece of Weirdmageddon cut content is the live-action sequence in the first part, the moment when Dipper and Wendy briefly pass through one of Bill's weirdness bubbles and find themselves transformed into live-action versions of themselves. The voice actors Jason Ritter, who voiced Dipper across the entire run, and Linda Cardellini, who voiced Wendy, appear on screen as their actual adult selves. For just a few seconds, they scream, they flicker, they return to their cartoon selves. It is one of the most surreal moments in the show, a deliberate disruption of the audience's expectation of the medium. The wiki and the writers describe it as the show breaking its own fourth wall by reaching through the screen to show you the human beings behind the voices. In the aired episode, the moment is over, almost as soon as it begins. The deleted version of that scene, revealed at MomoCon in 2017, is much longer. In the deleted version, Jason Ritter and Linda Cardellini as their adult selves actually have a few seconds to react to being inside a cartoon. Ritter looks at his hands and is shocked by how many fingers he has. Cardellini looks at herself and says, in a small, comically vain moment, that she actually looks pretty good. It is a small bit of dialogue. It is the kind of thing that, if you were not paying attention, you might miss. But it changes the entire feel of the scene. The aired version is a brief disruption. The deleted version is a small, funny, almost loving acknowledgement of the human beings inside the cartoon. The reason the longer version was cut, the writers have said, is pacing. The live-action moment is only one of 3 bubbles that Dipper and Wendy go through in that sequence. The bubble had to be short, or the gag would have started to drag. So the live actors got their 3 seconds, and the rest of the scene went into a folder. It is one of the very few cases in animation history where 2 real actors filmed a deleted scene that nobody outside the studio saw for years. There is one more piece of Weirdmageddon cut content that fans have noted, from various accounts and commentaries. In the original draft of one of the Bill scenes in the second part, Escape from Reality, there is a moment, late in the scene, where Bill realizes he cannot escape the situation he has placed himself in. He pauses. He says something. The moment is short, and it has been described in interviews, but never released in storyboard form. In the aired episode, that beat of Bill's hesitation is replaced with a different exchange. The cut version is in the writers' minds. It is the kind of deletion that fans of the show have spent years writing fan fiction around, because Bill's hesitation, even for a moment, is the kind of vulnerability the show otherwise never gives him. The way to think about all of these Weirdmageddon cuts is that the finale is, at its heart, an enormous emotional contraption that has to deliver a number of distinct payoffs in a specific order. Every cut was a piece of plumbing being torn out so that the engine could keep running. The song was cut because it would have slowed Bill's takeover. The live-action sequence was shortened because it would have killed the pace of the bubble chase. The Bill hesitation moment was cut because it would have given him too much sympathy at the wrong time. The We'll Meet Again license was almost cut because it cost too much. The post-finale epilogue was cut because the goodbye had already been made. Each of these decisions was, in retrospect, almost certainly correct. The show as it stands is a tight, almost surgical finale. But the cost of that tightness is a series of small, beautiful, deeply specific pieces of imagined television that nobody, including the writers, ever quite got to see in full. The other thing worth saying about Weirdmageddon, before we drift into the post-show lost media, is what the storyboard archive looks like. The show's storyboards, which are the hand-drawn sequential sketches that artists use to plan how each scene will move, are themselves a kind of treasure trove of cut content. Some have been released, some have been shared by individual storyboard artists on their social media. Some have appeared in the art book releases that have come out across the years. The pre-production work for Gravity Falls is one of the most documented bodies of work in modern animation, partly because the show's fans demanded that documentation and partly because Hirsch and his team genuinely wanted the work preserved. The single most lavish artifact of that documentation is the Art of Gravity Falls book, which has been announced for release on September 15, 2026. The book is being published by Disney Editions and is described as containing previously unseen concept art, character sketches, storyboards, and color scripts from the show's development. By the standards of animation history, this is a significant artifact, partly because the show has been off the air for a decade by the time the book comes out, and the production team has had 10 years to revisit, organize, and decide what is worth releasing. The book is, in a way, going to be the formal closing of a chapter of Gravity Falls lost media, material that for years lived in folders, on hard drives, in tweet threads, in the personal archives of the team, will be collected and printed and made available to anyone who buys the book. That is the kind of treatment that an animated television series only rarely gets. It is also the kind of treatment that this show, with its near-obsessive fan culture, almost demands. Before The Art of Gravity Falls comes out, the public archive of the show's behind-the-scenes material is, in a way, scattered. There are storyboards on the wiki, there are deleted scenes on the box set, there are tweet threads with cut storyboards and notes, there is the high-definition pilot and the next time on reel. There are notes on the writer's room dynamic from various panels and interviews. There are the partial uncensored commentaries that Hirsch has hinted at someday releasing. And there is the slow, patient work the fan community has done over the last 10 years of dragging every clip and every storyboard out of the dark and into the light. Now we should move on to what is, after the show ended, the most remarkable single piece of Gravity Falls lost media history. The thing that turned the show, in its very last days, into a literal scavenger hunt. The thing that put a statue of Bill Cipher in a forest in Oregon. The thing that turned a Disney Channel show's final image into a real-world location that real people traveled across continents to reach. We are talking about Cipher Hunt, the alternate reality game that Alex Hirsch quietly launched in July of 2016. Cipher Hunt began on July 20, 2016, with a cryptic tweet from Hirsch. The tweet, posted in the voice of Bill Cipher, pointed fans towards a location in St. Petersburg, Russia. The location was a real, physical location. There were instructions, written in cipher and in symbols, that fans had to decode. There was a sense, almost immediately, that something unusual was happening. Within hours, fans on the ground in St. Petersburg had reached the location. There was a clue. The clue pointed to another location, in another country, then another, then another. The hunt rapidly globalized. Fans in country after country found themselves needing to coordinate, online, with fans on the ground in cities they had never been to. The Tumblr posts and Twitter threads from the hunt are a strange, joyful record of an enormous improvised dispersed cooperation. People who had never met one another were calling friends in other countries. People were taking photos at 3 in the morning at strange addresses in distant cities. People were translating clues out of Russian and Japanese and German. The hunt was a kind of slow-motion festival of decoding and travel. The endpoint of the hunt, of course, was the United States. Specifically, a forest in Reedsport, Oregon, near the real-world Oregon coast that had been one of the inspirations for the show's setting. There, hidden in the trees, was a roughly life-size statue of Bill Cipher, the show's main villain, with his triangle body, his single eye, his top hat, and his cane. The statue had been built by Fawn Davis, a friend of Hirsch's who works as a movie prop master. He built it out of plexiglass so that it would survive the elements. He coated it in glue mixed with seeds so that moss would grow on it and so that it would age more naturally in the forest. The statue was meant to be there. It was meant to be found. The statue was officially found on August 2, 2016, at around 7:53 in the evening Pacific Daylight Time, by a Twitter user who at the time went by the handle shadow_wolfwind, and who afterwards changed her handle to official GF Mayor in honor of the find. She tweeted a photograph of the statue, and the photograph went around the fan community within minutes. By the time the rest of the Cipher hunters caught up to her, the location had become a small pilgrimage site. Fans began to travel to the forest. There was a treasure chest buried at the foot of the statue, which was dug up by later hunters. There were people shaking the statue's hand. There was, apparently, even a baby in one of the photographs reaching out to take Bill's hand for a deal. That image is one of the more darkly funny pieces of Gravity Falls lore in the wild. What happened next is one of the more melancholy chapters in the Cipher Hunt story. The day after the statue was found, on August 3rd, The statue and its treasure were taken away by local authorities. There had been a property conflict between the apparent proprietor who had authorized Hirsch to place the statue on the land and another person who claimed ownership of the land where it had ended up. The legal dispute meant that the statue could not stay where it had been placed. It was removed from the forest. There was, briefly, a real possibility that the statue would be destroyed or simply disappear. That did not happen. The statue was eventually moved to a roadside attraction called Confusion Hill in Piercy, California, where it was installed as a permanent exhibit. It still sits there now, with a fresh top hat, as part of the attraction. The Roadside Curiosity Museum, in its way, is the perfect afterlife for the Cipher Hunt statue. The show was always interested in roadside Americana, in the strange little tourist traps that dot the American West, in the cracked plexiglass and faded paint of the kind of small business that says it has the world's largest something. Confusion Hill is exactly that kind of place. Putting Bill there was, in a way, putting him exactly where he belonged. The statue lives on as a piece of attended folklore. It is a piece of Gravity Falls that is not on the screen, and not in a book, and not in a box set. It is in a forest gift shop hybrid in Northern California. It is, if you want, a place you can drive to. Cipher Hunt is, for that reason, a strange entry in the lost media catalog. The statue is not lost, you can go and see it. But the experience of Cipher Hunt itself, the 2-week global treasure hunt, is now lost media. The clues are decoded. The cipher chains have all been published. The Tumblr posts that documented the hunt are still online, but in a fragmented form. You cannot do the hunt again. You can only read about it. The Cipher Hunt is a story you can recover, but it is not an event you can re-enter. The version of Gravity Falls fandom that lived in those 2 weeks of July and August 2016 is its own kind of lost media, a brief shared experience that exists now only in the screenshots and Tumblr posts of the people who were there. There is a very Gravity Falls melancholy in that fact. The show was about a summer that the twins would never have again. The hunt was a kind of summer that the fans would never have again either. There was something fitting in the way it ended. The pilot was released as the prize for the hunt, which we have already touched on. The way Hirsch tied the pilot's release to the completion of Cipher Hunt is, in retrospect, a small piece of canny showmanship. He turned a piece of lost media that the fans had been requesting for years into the reward at the end of an experience the fans would never forget. The pilot did not just come out, it came out on August 3, 2016, the day after the statue was found. It came out at the end of an act of fandom. That is one of the most carefully designed releases of a piece of animation lost media in modern history. There is a small detail of the Cipher Hunt's aftermath that is worth mentioning, because it sits inside the show's larger story about ciphers. Gravity Falls was, throughout its run, a show that hid messages in its credits. Every episode ends with a cryptogram, a coded message, sitting under the credits. Across the run of the show, those cryptograms switched between several encryption schemes, including Caesar shifts, @bash, the A1Z26 substitution, the Vigenère cipher, and direct binary. Fans, especially in the early years, would decode each episode's cipher within minutes of broadcast. The Cipher Hunt was, in a sense, the culmination of years of training. The fans had learned how to decode the show's ciphers. The hunt sent them out into the world to do it physically. The hunt is the show's cipher tradition turned into a piece of geography. It is one of the most impressive pieces of audience engagement in animation history. Now let us turn to the books, because Gravity Falls did not stop when the show stopped. The official mythology kept growing in print, and several of the books that have come out since the show ended are themselves either pieces of partially lost media or are vessels containing lost media inside them. The first of those is Journal 3, which was published in July of 2016. The journal is the in-universe object that Dipper and Ford spend much of the show chasing, the third of the journals that Ford wrote during his initial study of Gravity Falls' weirdness. Hirsch wrote it in character, as a kind of partial transcription of the in-universe document. The journal is full of small entries about creatures, about events, about Ford's relationships, and about the weirdness of the town. It is one of the few cases in television tie-in publishing where the book is, in a real sense, more canonical than most fans would have any right to expect. Hirsch put real backstory in it. He put closures to character arcs in it. He put the kind of detail that only a creator who really cared about the world would put in. But Journal 3's most remarkable secret is one you cannot see by reading the book in normal light. Sections of the book are written in invisible ink. To read them, you need a black light. In the show, Dipper carries a small UV flashlight which he uses to reveal hidden messages on the pages of Journal 3. The real, physical Journal 3 duplicates that mechanism. There are pages in the book where, under black light, additional sentences, drawings, and entire passages reveal themselves. There are two brains drawn in invisible ink, one smaller than the other, with an arrow pointing from the smaller brain to the larger one, and text reading normal brain and super brain. There is a section of the book that, when held under UV, reveals a hidden staircase winding around a tree illustration and a warning pointing down to a bunker beneath the tree's roots. There is a page with binary code on it that, under black light, also reveals the Blind Eye Society's symbol, and the binary itself decodes into the message put all 6 pieces together. What is interesting about that line is that it implies the existence of a larger encoded message that spans all 3 of the journals together. The journals 1 and 2 have never been physically released by Disney. They exist in the world of the show, but they have never been printed for fans to buy. The implication of the put all 6 pieces together line, taken together with the fact that all 3 journals contain similar invisible ink content, is that there is meant to be, somewhere in the show's mythology, a single combined message that can only be read when all 3 journals are placed together under black light. As far as fans have pieced together, the combined message reads as a warning written by Ford about the machine that was meant to create knowledge but is too powerful, that the device could tear the universe apart, that he was wrong the whole time, that it must not fall into the wrong hands, and that if the clock ever reaches 0, the universe is doomed. That message is a piece of canon that fans can only experience if they own the official Journal 3 and have access to a black light. It is hidden lore, it is canon, but it is gated behind a physical artifact. There is something very Gravity Falls about that. The show was always about secrets that you needed to know how to look at. The book version of the journal extends that into the real world. In 2017, Disney released the Blacklight edition of Journal 3, which is a special version of the book in which the invisible ink content is enhanced with reactive UV ink across many pages. Fans who own the Blacklight edition have effectively a separate, deeper version of the book, where some pages glow with content that the regular edition does not show. There are countless walkthroughs of the Blacklight edition that have been posted online over the years, in which fans painstakingly photograph every page under UV and document every detail that changes. The book in normal light is a beautiful object. The book under black light is, in a real sense, a different book. There is something very specific about that fact that fits the Gravity Falls philosophy. The show was a show about reading the world more carefully than other people read it, about paying attention to backgrounds, to symbols, to credits, to ciphers, to small details that other people would miss. The Journal 3 book is the show's worldview turned into a piece of furniture. The reader who is willing to buy a UV flashlight, or who already owns the Blacklight edition, sees a deeper version of the canon. The reader who is not willing to do that sees only the surface. The show wants you to be the kind of person who reads the deeper version. The journal is, in that sense, both a book and a quiz. The second of the post-show books is Gravity Falls Lost Legends, which was released on July 24, 2018. Lost Legends is a graphic novel. Hirsch wrote the 4 stories, and the actual comic art was done by several artists, including Asaf Hanuka and Dana Terrace, the latter of whom would go on to create The Owl House. The 4 stories in Lost Legends are described, in the publisher's own marketing, as adventures that take place within the continuity of the show. Hirsch has, in interviews, framed them as canonical episodes that simply happen to be told in comic form instead of in animation. They are, in other words, recovered lost media. The premise of the book is essentially that these are stories from Gravity Falls that the show never had the time to tell, and that the Journal 3 project did not cover, and that Hirsch had been saving for the right format. The book even leans into that framing in its title, Lost Legends. These are the things you missed. The 4 stories vary in tone and in stakes. The first story, Face It, is about Pacifica showing up at the Mystery Shack with a problem. She has a small wrinkle on her face. She is about to have her family's annual photo shoot the following day, and she cannot have a wrinkle on her face in front of her parents. She wants Dipper to let her use the journals to find a magical solution. Dipper, who has been left to guard the journals while Ford is away on an errand, refuses. Pacifica, being Pacifica, finds another way. She ends up summoning a creature that steals Mabel's face. The story is, At the surface, a kind of body horror comedy. Underneath that surface, it is one of the most direct pieces of post-show writing about Pacifica's struggle with her parents. Her terror of the photo shoot, her terror of having a wrinkle, her need to find a magical fix rather than admit anything to her family, is the same trauma the show explored in Northwest Mansion Mystery, only now without the safety of the show's surrounding context. It is a small piece of Pacifica's life that the show never got to spend an episode on. The fact that it is in the comics rather than in the show makes it feel a little more like recovered lost content. It is the version of Pacifica we would have got in an unproduced third season episode. The second story, Comics Up, is about Stan getting trapped in a world of comics. It is the broadest, most playful story in the book. The whole comic plays as a kind of metafictional joke. Stan, who in the show has a complicated relationship to fiction and to performance, ends up forced to inhabit a series of different comic book styles, with the visual design of the panels changing as he moves through them. It is, in its way, a kind of love letter to the comics medium from a creator who has spent his entire career working in television. There is a piece of Hirsch's craft on display in that story that the animated show could not have shown in the same way. The actual mechanics of comic book pacing and panel design are part of the gag. The third story, Don't Dimension It, is about Mabel. Mabel in this story gets pulled into a multiverse filled with many different Mabels. The premise lets Hirsch and the artists play with every possible variation on Mabel's identity. There is, in this multiverse, a version of Mabel who is a princess. There is a version of Mabel who is a wizard. There is, by most accounts, a version of Mabel who is a robot, known as Mab3L. And there is, at the center of the story, a Mabel who calls herself Anti-Mabel, the most evil Mabel in the multiverse. The anti-Mabel concept is one of the strangest pieces of post-show canon that the books have introduced. The show, as broadcast, was always careful to keep Mabel uncomplicated, in a particular emotional sense. She had moments of sadness, moments of fury, moments of grief, but she was always, fundamentally, the show's heart. The idea that there is a multiverse of Mabels and that one of them is the most evil version of her plays with that fact in an interesting way. It implies that even Mabel, if you spin the dials differently, can become the villain of her own story. It is a piece of late, postcard-style world-building that the show as broadcast would not have had the room to attempt. The fourth story, Pine's Brothers Mystery, also titled The Jersey Devils in the Details, is the most canonically interesting of the four. It is a flashback story about young Stan and young Ford. The Pines brothers, in their teenage years, try to catch a supernatural jewel thief in Glass Shard Beach. The story is the closest the book comes to filling in the show's official backstory. The show, in the A Tale of Two Stans episode, gave us the basic shape of Stan and Ford's youth, the close brotherhood, the science fair accident, the falling out with their father, the years on the road. Pine's Brothers Mystery takes a small slice of that life, before the accident, and lets us spend more time in it. It is, in a way, a piece of canon that the show would have produced if it had had the room for a Stan and Ford prequel episode. It exists now only as a comic. That is one of the more interesting little technical points about Lost Legends. The book is not lost media in itself, but the stories inside it are stories that were lost media, in the sense that the show never told them. The book is a means of recovering them. Lost Legends made the New York Times bestseller list in August 2018, which is in itself a small piece of cultural history. A graphic novel based on a Disney Channel animated series that had ended 2 years earlier made the New York Times bestseller list. It is hard to find another animated series that has had that kind of post-finale staying power in the publishing market. The book sold because the show had built an audience that was hungry for any new canonical material. Lost Legends was, in essence, a 4-episode miniseason delivered in print. It was the closest thing the fans were going to get to new episodes, and the book stepped up to play that role. Between Lost Legends and the larger projects that followed, there were other small post-show artifacts. There was a coloring book called Don't Color This Book, It's Cursed, which Disney released on July 18, 2017. The book was written by Cicierega, whose brother Neil composed some of the show's most memorable music, and was illustrated by Stephanie Ramirez. It combined a coloring book and a mini-storybook. It featured small, in-universe writing, framing the coloring activities as a cursed book that you should not be coloring in, but that you cannot resist coloring in anyway. The premise was tongue-in-cheek, but it was also, in a way, in keeping with the show's larger interest in interactive artifacts that the reader has to engage with physically. The coloring book had a small printed run. After being available for several years, it was discontinued in 2022. For a time, it became one of the more sought-after pieces of Gravity Falls printed ephemera. Fans would pay inflated prices for original copies. Then, on May 6, 2025, Disney quietly re-released the book in a nearly identical second edition. The decision to bring the book back, after the original had become a collector's item, was an unusual move. It suggests that someone inside Disney Publishing recognized that the Gravity Falls market had not gone away. The book had been, for a few years, partially lost media in the sense that it was out of print and difficult to obtain. The re-release returned it to the market. There were also a number of in-universe books that had to be created for the show that, in the show's continuity, are themselves lost media inside the world of Gravity Falls. There is, in the show's lore, Journal Number 1 and Journal Number 2. We see them on screen. They are part of the larger set with Journal 3, the 3 books that Ford wrote during his initial study of the town's weirdness. Within the show, Journal Number 1 is the journal that Gideon stole in Season 1 and that Bill destroys when he takes over Gideon's body in the sock opera episode. Journal Number 2 is the journal that Bill gets hold of in the late portions of the show and uses for his own purposes. In the show's mythology, both of those books exist and matter. In the real world, the 2 journals have never been physically published. They exist only in the show. They are pieces of in-universe canon that fans cannot read. They are, in that very specific sense, both diegetic media and lost media at the same time. The fact that we have Journal 3, but not Journal 1 or Journal 2, is, after almost a decade, still one of the most discussed pieces of unreleased Gravity Falls merchandise. Fans have asked Hirsch about it many times. The answer, so far, has been that there are no current plans to release them. That fact takes on a new color after the publication of the Book of Bill in 2024. Because the Book of Bill is, in a sense, the eventual companion to Journal 3. If Journal 3 is the show's hero's journal, the book that Ford wrote and that Dipper inherited, then the Book of Bill is, in a sense, the show's villain's journal. It is a book written from the perspective of Bill Cipher. It is the show's antagonist getting to tell his own version of the story, and it contains, hidden inside it, what is by some accounts the largest single piece of secret canonical material that the show has ever released into the world. The Book of Bill came out on July 23, 2024, almost exactly 8 years after Cipher Hunt. The book is written entirely in Bill's voice. It is a stylized, glittery, manic monologue, full of asides, of warnings, of bad jokes, of memories of Bill's home dimension, of memories of his various dealings across the multiverse. It also contains, by design, a series of puzzles. The same way Journal 3 contained invisible ink secrets that only revealed themselves under UV, the Book of Bill contains visible puzzles that the reader must solve to access additional content. There are ciphers, there are references to be cross-checked, there are passages that point, obliquely, to additional resources outside the book. The most famous of those resources is a website. The Book of Bill is built around a hidden website. The address of the website is itself a small joke. It is thisisnotawebsited.com, low. When you go to it, you are greeted with a simple page. You cannot do anything with it unless you enter a passcode. The book contains the passcode hidden in its text. The passcode that opens the first layer of the site is, as far as fans have pieced together, T.J. Eckelberg. That phrase is itself a reference to The Great Gatsby, to the famous billboard with the giant eyes that watches over the Valley of Ashes. The Great Gatsby reference is fitting for Bill, because Bill is a being who watches things with one giant eye and who exists in a kind of Valley of Ashes between dimensions. The site, once unlocked, contained a timer. The timer counted down to a series of revelations. As the timer hit 0, additional content unlocked. Over the course of the months following the book's release, fans worked through more and more of these unlockable layers. The content that surfaced from those layers is some of the strangest and richest post-show canonical material the show has ever generated. There is a series of new journal entries credited to Ford and to Mabel, by most accounts written under the heading Ad Astra per Aspera. There is a short story chronicling Bill's first fight with the Time Baby, the dimensional being who manages the integrity of the timeline in the show, under the heading Tantrum. There is a side story in which Bill makes a deal with Pacifica, by most accounts under the title Platinum Paz, which complicates Pacifica's relationship to her family's wealth in a way that the show itself never quite did. And there is a long side story, around a dozen pages, about a cult that Bill founded in the 1950s, by most accounts under a title that reads Connect the Dots, written backwards. The cult story is a sustained piece of horror writing that is one of the longest single pieces of new Gravity Falls canon to come out since the show ended. What makes all of this lost media in the traditional sense is the way the content is gated. None of it was sold to readers. None of it was distributed through normal channels. The only way to access it was to buy the book, decode the puzzles, find the website, enter the passwords, wait for the timer, and read what was on the other side. Fans who did not do those things did not see the content. They could read about it, they could read summaries from other fans, but the experience of unlocking the content is itself an artifact that you can only have once. The thing that the show has always done, the gating of canon behind the act of paying attention, is back in full force in the Book of Bill. It is, in a sense, the philosophical inverse of normal television. Normal television gives you the canon and asks you to enjoy it. Gravity Falls gives you the canon and asks you to earn it. The Book of Bill also leaves room for further content. In December of 2024, fans started receiving emails. The emails contained an image of a Christmas tree with several Bill-themed decorations and presents. Across the top of the image was text reading signed copies available at bookofbill.eventbrite.com. The implication was that, for a limited time, fans could buy signed copies of the book through a special Eventbrite link. The signed copies cost, by most accounts, around $37 plus shipping. Fans who paid received signed copies in the mail. Fans who did not receive the original email but who heard about the offer through fan channels could, for a time, sign up as well. This is the kind of small, deliberately niche distribution that the show's team has used over and over again. The book itself is widely available. The deepest layer of engagement with the book, the signed copy, the private email, the personalized order, was deliberately scarce. That whole apparatus, the book and the site and the timer and the secret content and the signed copies, is one of the more impressive pieces of ongoing alternate reality gaming in modern media. The fact that it is happening for a show that ended a decade ago, with no announced sequel, no announced new season, no announced film, is in itself a kind of cultural artifact. The Book of Bill is, in a sense, what Gravity Falls fandom has become. It is a show that maintains its mystique not by producing new episodes, but by producing new puzzles. The puzzles, in their way, are the new content. It is worth pausing here and saying that this is, by the show's own design, the way Gravity Falls intends to live forever. The show ended in 2016. The Cipher hunt closed in the same year. The Lost Legends book came out 2 years after that. The Book of Bill came out 8 years after that. The Art of Gravity Falls book is coming out in 2026. There is no announced new season. There is no announced film. There is instead a slow, steady release of canonical artifacts that fans must engage with to access. The show is not dead. It is not even resting. It is in a long, slow afterlife in which it gradually releases the material that did not fit into the original 40 episodes. The lost media is, in a way, the show's new format. There are smaller pieces of post-show lost media that are worth mentioning before we move into the closing reflection. The Disney XD shorts that came out between Season 1 and Season 2 are themselves a small archive of partial lost media. The shorts were aired in 5 series. Dipper's Guide to the Unexplained kicked off on October 14, 2013, with new shorts premiering every day that week. Mabel's Guide to Life started on February 3, 2014, with new shorts premiering every day that week. Fixin' It with Seuss started on April 21, 2014. The TV short series began on April 23, 2014. The Mabel's Scrapbook series was the 5th and final block. Together, these shorts make up a substantial number of small pieces of canon that aired in the show's run, but that are easy to overlook. They were never put on Disney Channel reruns at the same frequency as the main episodes. They were never collected on a separate DVD. They were eventually included as exclusive bonus features in the complete series box set released by Shout Factory on July 24, 2018, and they were eventually added to Disney+. But for years, they sat at the edges of the show, half-remembered, partially streaming, sometimes available, sometimes not. They are one of the small canonical archives that the show's mainstream audience often overlooks. To watch them all in order is, in its way, a small piece of Gravity Falls completism. They are quiet, low-stakes pieces of the show, but they contain real character information. Dipper's guide goes into the show's actual creatures. Mabel's guide is full of character beats. Seuss's repair shorts are short character studies in their own right, and Mabel's scrapbook works as a kind of B-roll commentary track over moments from the show. There are also fragments of the show's official tie-in books that are themselves quietly piecemeal lost media. The Don't Color This Book artwork by Stephanie Ramirez contains in-universe drawings of characters in poses and scenes that the show never produced. The earlier tales of the Strange Activity book and the Dipper and Mabel and the Curse of the Time Pirates treasure book, the Big Mystery Activity book, and the various tie-in junior novelizations all contain small variations on the show's canon. None of those books are formally lost media. They are still in print or available used, but the small details inside them, the throwaway lines about how a creature behaves, the small character beats inside puzzle activities, the moments of dialogue inside a Mad Lib, are pieces of canon that almost nobody reads carefully. They sit in a strange middle ground between official content and forgotten content. The completionist fan reads them. The casual fan does not know they exist. There is also one strange archival category that fans have noticed across the years, which is the deleted scenes that exist on the box set but only for Season 2. The complete series set, the Shout Factory release from 2018, contains over an hour of Season 2 deleted scenes. It contains 0 Season 1 deleted scenes. It is not that no Season 1 scenes were cut, it is that, for one reason or another, the original Disney Channel production of Season 1 did not preserve deleted material in a way that could be released. Specific Season 2 episodes are also missing from the deleted scenes list. There are, by most accounts, no cuts on the box set from Little Gift Shop of Horrors, Blendin's Game, The Love God, Northwest Mansion Mystery, Dungeons and More Dungeons, The Stanchurian Candidate, or The Last Mabelcorn. The deletions are documented in commentary. They are not, however, released in playable form. For each of those episodes, there is, in a sense, a smaller subset of episode-level lost media that simply did not make it into the formal archive. That is part of why fans have continued to ask, year after year, for an expanded or remastered release of the full season material. The box set, generous as it is itself an incomplete archive. The complete archive lives, presumably, in the studio. There is a particular category of partially lost media that the fan community has cared about more than any other, and that is the partially censored commentary. We touched on this earlier. The commentary tracks on the Shout Factory box set are recorded with Hirsch and various cast members, and there are places in those tracks where the audio cuts out. When the audio comes back, the speakers are talking about something else entirely. It is clear that whole pieces of the conversation were deleted before the box set was released. The reason, by Hirsch's own statements, is that the participants said things that Disney did not want to keep in the formal record. Some of those things were jokes. Some of them, by various accounts, were stories about the production of the show that were not flattering to Disney. Hirsch has said, in interviews and on social media, that he would like, one day, to make a version of the uncensored commentaries available. He has not said when. Several years on, that promise sits in the same category as the unreleased Journal No. 1 and Journal No. 2, as a piece of future lost media that fans hope they will eventually get and that they have no way of forcing into the world. That kind of slow, patient lost media is, in a sense, the spine of the Gravity Falls fan experience. The show is, by now, a decade old. It is no longer the new hit on the channel. It is not the kind of show whose merchandise dominates the shelves of every Disney store. But its fan community is, as anyone who has spent time on the show's various Reddit and Tumblr communities can attest, one of the most active animation fandoms still going. Part of what keeps that fan community alive is the slow drip of lost content. Every few months, someone announces a new artifact, a new tweet from Hirsch, a new storyboard from a former writer, a new puzzle in the Book of Bill, a new countdown on a hidden site, a new corner of canon that has, until now, been quietly held back. The show's afterlife is, in itself, an act of slow excavation. The fans are constantly digging. The creators are constantly hiding things to be found. It is worth slowing down here and revisiting some of the smaller deleted scenes that we have not yet given their full time. The wiki and the box set notes contain a number of small, beautiful, mostly forgotten cuts that did not change the shape of any episode, but that quietly enrich the show if you know they exist. We are going to walk through some of those now, because they are the kind of detail that the show's fan community has spent years gently cataloging. In the second season episode The Gulf War, in which Pacifica and Mabel end up locked in a small, reluctant alliance during a mini-golf tournament against a community of tiny golfers known as the Lilliputians. There were small cut moments centered on the Lilliputians' internal politics. The show is full of these small cultures, each with its own faction conflicts and its own internal lore, and the Lilliputians were originally going to get more of that on-screen time. The aired episode hints at it. The Lilliputians' color-coded factions, their rivalries, their political infighting, are all visible in the cut and the way the camera moves through their world. But there were originally longer scenes inside the Lilliputians' world, in which their politics were treated almost as a sustained comedy in their own right. Those longer scenes were cut for time. What survives in the aired episode is a tighter, more cartoonish version of their society. The longer cut, the one in which their politics played out at greater length, is the kind of cut that you can feel the shape of even though you cannot see it. The show as broadcast is faster. The cut version was, in its way, more patient. The Society of the Blind Eye, which we mentioned earlier in the context of the cut Headhunters material, is itself a vehicle for many small cuts in the episode that finally formally introduces them. The Society of the Blind Eye, the 7th episode of Season 2, was not in fact the show's first attempt at telling the story of a memory-erasing cult in Gravity Falls. The story had been carried in storyboards and in commentary going all the way back to early Season 1. By the time it surfaced in formal narrative, it had been rewritten, recompressed, and retooled. There are scattered references in the commentary to scenes in the episode that were originally longer, particularly the McGucket reveal at the end. The aired version of that reveal is one of the most carefully constructed pieces of writing in the early second season. The cut version, in some commentaries, contained more emotional space for the reveal. It contained more of McGucket sitting silently with himself. The aired version is condensed. The cut version is more meditative. Either version would work. The choice to compress it was, by the writer's account, a question of episode rhythm rather than substance. In the episode Bottomless Pit, which is one of the show's nominally lighter offerings, the framing device of the 4 characters falling into the pit and telling each other stories was originally going to allow for several stories that did not make it into the final cut. The aired episode contains 4 stories. The pitch document, in some accounts, contained more than that. A couple of stories were trimmed. The exact content of those trimmed stories is not formally documented. The ones that survived are the more memorable ones, including the story of Seuss's voice-changing pitch, the story of Stan being banned from the local convenience store, and the others. The trimmed stories are the kind of small piece of canon that exists only in writers' notes. They are mentioned in passing in interviews. They have not been formally released. In the first season episode Boys Crazy, which is the episode in which the boy band Several Temez is revealed to be a series of bioengineered clones, there is a small piece of cut content involving the band's original name. The band was, by some accounts, originally called Real Boys in early script drafts. The change to Several Temez was a relatively late edit. The reason, according to the commentary, was that Real Boys did not communicate the joke. The phrase Several Temez, with its play on the band's own marketing of their many catchy choruses, makes the joke land more cleanly. The change is, in retrospect, obviously correct. But the earlier scripts exist. There is a version of the show in which the boy band is called Real Boys. That version of the show is, in a small way, lost media. In the first season episode Carpet Diem, which is the body swap episode, there is a small set of cut moments involving the body swap that did not make it into the final cut. The aired episode focuses on the swaps between Mabel and Dipper, between Seuss and Waddles, between Stan and the goat. The cut content, in some descriptions, included a small additional swap that the writers felt would have been a step too far for the audience. The exact swap has not been formally documented. The implication, in the commentary, is that it was a swap involving Stan and a character whose body swap would have read as too uncomfortable on screen. In the second season episode Roadside Attraction, in which Stan takes Dipper, Seuss, and Mabel on a road trip to a series of competing roadside attractions, there were small cut moments at most of the stops. The episode is structured as a tour of strange tourist traps, and each stop has its own visual gag. The cut content, according to the commentary, included additional stops that were trimmed for time. The structure of a road trip episode is naturally elastic, and the writers had originally planned a tour that included more attractions than the aired episode could accommodate. Those additional attractions are mentioned in passing. They have not been documented in detail. They are the kind of small piece of cut content that adds another layer to an already dense episode. In the second season episode Dipper and Mabel versus the Future, in which Bill begins his preparations to use Mabel's despair to break into the real world, there were small moments of additional dialogue cut for time. The aired episode is one of the most emotionally precise pieces of writing the show ever produced. The reveal that Dipper is being given the chance to stay in Gravity Falls and become Ford's apprentice, the reveal that Mabel has been hiding her despair about the end of summer, the way both of those reveals dovetail into the moment when Mabel falls into despair and Bill seizes his opening, are all carefully constructed. Cut content from that episode has been described in the commentary as mostly atmospheric, small extensions of moments, slightly longer pauses. The aired version moves quickly. The cut version was, by some accounts, slightly more drawn out. Either version would work. The aired version is the one we have. In the first part of Weirdmageddon, there is a particularly haunting deleted moment involving Mabel's bubble. Mabel's bubble, the perfect prison Bill builds for her out of her own desires, is one of the most striking pieces of imagery in the show. In the aired episode, it is presented relatively quickly. In the original script and storyboards, there was, by some accounts, a longer sequence of Mabel exploring her bubble before the audience and Dipper began to register what it actually was. That longer exploration was trimmed for time. The aired version moves faster, but the cut version, according to writers' descriptions, was more disturbing because it gave the viewer more time to register how perfectly Bill had targeted Mabel's specific fears. There is a deleted moment in the very last episode that we have not yet talked about. The actual final scene of the show after the credits contains the small stinger in which a hand reaches towards the petrified statue of Bill Cipher and shakes it. The shake is the show's final note. It implies that Bill, in some form, is still in the world. The deleted version of that scene, according to some commentary, was slightly longer. The shake was held for a fraction longer. The aired version is faster. The longer version is in the writer's notes. The reason, by some accounts, that it was shortened is that the show wanted to end on a note of suggestion rather than confirmation. The longer shake, in some accounts, felt too pointed. The shorter version is more ambiguous. The shorter version is also, in the years since, the version that has fueled the most fan speculation about what would happen next. The Book of Bill, in some sense, eventually grew out of that small shake. The longer version, the cut version, would have made the show's final note slightly less open. The trimmer's instinct, in that case, was almost certainly correct. One of the most interesting smaller pieces of lost media is not a scene at all but a song. The Gravity Falls theme song, the one composed by Brad Breek that opens every episode, went through a number of iterations before it landed on the form we know. The early sketches of the theme song are themselves a small archive of partial canon. There are scattered references in interviews to versions of the theme that were considered and rejected. The final theme, with its eerie wordless choir, its small mysterious melody, its rhythm of building strangeness, is one of the most distinctive opening themes in modern animation. The theme song's hidden cipher, the whispered word in the background, is itself part of the show's larger cipher culture. Cut versions of the theme exist in the show's development archive, but have not been formally released. Hirsch and Breek have occasionally mentioned them in interviews. They are, in their way, another piece of small lost media tucked inside the show's overall presentation. There is also a quiet body of audio releases that Hirsch has put out across the years that have themselves contained pieces of recovered canon. Around the show's 10th anniversary, in 2022, Hirsch released a series of short audio recordings that contained Stan and Ford speaking in character. Those audio releases are, in a way, the show's smallest format. They are not full episodes. They are not even shorts. They are short audio pieces that exist on social media and that have not, in some cases, been formally archived anywhere. They are pieces of small new canon that exist mostly because Hirsch felt like making them and felt like releasing them. They are not lost media in the strictest sense, but they are the kind of small artifact that, if not preserved, could very easily disappear in a few years as social media platforms shift and as posts age out of accessibility. The same is true of various pieces of fan-collected official content that have appeared on Hirsch's own social media over the years. The thread of Disney standards and practices notes that we mentioned earlier, with its lists of objections to Poopface and Lucifer and Kentucky, was originally posted to Twitter in 2022 during the 10th anniversary. The images of those notes are screenshots Hirsch took of internal Disney emails. The screenshots are a piece of behind-the-scenes documentation that, in the strictest sense, are now scattered across social media archives. They are not formally published. They are not in any book. They are not in the box set. They live on Hirsch's account. They could, hypothetically, disappear. The fact that the fan community has saved copies of them, has reposted them, has kept screenshots, is what keeps them accessible. The small history of Gravity Falls censorship is a piece of lost media that is being preserved by the audience, not by the studio. That brings us, in a sense, to the larger truth about Gravity Falls and lost media. Gravity Falls is not a show whose lost media has been mostly destroyed or forgotten. It is a show whose lost media has been almost obsessively documented, preserved, cataloged, and discussed. The fans have done it. The creators have helped. There is more documentation of cut content from Gravity Falls than there is of the actual aired episodes of many other animated shows of the same era. What that documentation suggests, when you step back and look at it as a whole, is a show that was never quite finished, and that has, for 10 years now, continued to spool out into the world in slow, careful pieces. There is a particular emotional register that Gravity Falls has always lived in, which is the sense that something you love is ending. That register is in every episode of the show. The summer is always running out, the kids are always growing up, the journals are always being chased, the villains are always almost winning. The show is, at its very heart, a story about the end of childhood, about the strange way a particular summer or a particular season can take on the weight of an entire life and then end. Lost media, in a way, is the natural language of a show like that. The show is about things that vanish. Its own lost content is the show enacting itself. The unaired pilot, the version made in Adobe Flash that Hirsch did not love, is in a way a perfect first piece of lost media for the show, because it is the show before the show. It is the show's own younger self, the version that did not yet know what it was going to become, the version that, looking at it later, seems both familiar and strange in the way old footage of yourself often does. The pilot is the Mabel of Gravity Falls history, the cheerful, self-deprecating early sketch, kept in a drawer for years, eventually let out as a prize at the end of a treasure hunt for the show's villain. The next time on reel is the show's fake confidence, the trailer for the show that did not exist, the act of imagined future that the team had to perform to convince the network that there would be a future at all. The unproduced episodes, the planned epilogue, Wendy's on the Road, Silence of the Hams, the original draft of Double Dipper, are the show's roads not taken. They are the futures that did not come. They are the alternate histories of the show. The Wendy episode in particular has the painful weight of being the kind of episode that Wendy's character deserved and that the show did not have time to give her. Wendy is one of the most carefully written supporting characters in modern animation, and she did not get her solo episode. That fact is itself a kind of permanent absence in the show. She got Into the Bunker, which is a brilliant episode, but is shared with Dipper. She got moments in the Weirdmageddon block. She got fragments. She did not get her On the Road episode. She did not get her Wanderlust episode. The version of her that exists in the show is partial. The version that was sketched is gone. The Love God deleted scene is the show's small queer love that was almost there. The version of Gravity Falls in which the two elderly women fall in love in the diner is a version of the show that, if it had been allowed to air, would have shifted the cultural significance of the show subtly in a different direction. The show as it stands is queer-coded, queer-friendly, full of small symbols and small acknowledgments. The aired version was as far as Disney would go in 2015. The cut version was as far as Hirsch wanted to go. The gap between them is small, but it matters. The Love God scene is the show fighting to grow up and being told no. The cut songs and the cut live-action moments in Weirdmageddon are the show's surplus of imagination. It's Gonna Get Weird, Bill's villain song, is the version of the finale in which the audience gets a full musical number for the villain. The extended live-action moment with Jason Ritter and Linda Cardellini is the version of the show in which the actors get to break the fourth wall in earnest, not just for a few seconds. The cut We'll Meet Again moment is the version of the show in which Vera Lynn does not get to close the finale. Each of those moments is a window into a possible variant of the show that almost happened. Each of them is something the writers and the team had to choose to leave behind in order for the show as it stands to feel as tight as it does. The cost of a finely tuned finale is a graveyard of beautiful unfinished moments. The Weirdmageddon graveyard is full. The Cipher hunt is the show's own real-world ritual of lost media. It is the moment when the show stepped out of the screen and into the world. The statue, the clues, the dispersed cooperation, the eventual loss of the statue to a legal dispute, the eventual resurrection of the statue at Confusion Hill, are all part of an arc that the show as broadcast did not contain, but that the show as event included. The Cipher hunt is, in retrospect, the closest thing Gravity Falls had to a third season. It just happened in physical space rather than in animation. Journal 3 and the Blacklight edition are the show's invitation to keep looking. They are a piece of the show that the reader has to participate in to fully see. The hidden ink, the UV passages, the cross-journal warning about the device that could tear the universe apart are all gated behind small physical acts. The reader who buys a UV flashlight earns the deeper version of the canon. That is the show enacting its own values on the reader. The show was always about looking more carefully than other people look. The journal makes that the reader's literal job. Lost Legends and the Book of Bill are the show's slow, controlled afterlife. They are the format in which Gravity Falls continues to release small new pieces of canon, years after the show ended, gated behind books and websites and puzzles and passwords. They are a particular kind of franchise management that very few other animated shows have ever managed. The franchise is not running on inertia, it is running on small, careful new artifacts. Each artifact contains a piece of canon that the show could not include. Each artifact rewards the kind of fan who is willing to do the work. The various smaller pieces, the coloring book that was discontinued and re-released, the Disney XD shorts that have not always been streaming, the partial uncensored commentaries that Hirsch has hinted at one day releasing, the social media threads that have to be archived by the audience, are the show's looser ephemera. They sit at the edges, they are easy to miss. They are also, often, the place where the most specific personal fan attachments live. The fan who has watched every short, who owns the coloring book, who has read every Lost Legends story, who has unlocked every layer of the Book of Bill site, is the fan who has the full show. That is, in a way, the underlying gentle truth about Gravity Falls and Lost Media. The show is not a thing you watch. It is a thing you keep finding. It is a piece of media that quietly rewards continued attention. It is a piece of media that, 10 years after it ended, still has new content to release, new puzzles to solve, new ciphers to decode. The Lost Media is, in a sense, the show's actual format. The show was always going to be more than the 40 episodes. The 40 episodes were just the center of it. The pilot was the rough draft. The shorts were the asides. The journals were the deep canon. The hunt was the field trip. The books are the unfinished episodes. The site is the next chapter. The art book is the formal closing of a chapter. The signed copies are the small treasures that the most engaged fans receive. And underneath all of it is the basic emotional truth that Gravity Falls keeps coming back to, in different ways. The summer is ending. The show is ending. The childhood is ending. We are all, eventually, leaving Gravity Falls. The show, in its lost media, in its quiet ongoing release of small artifacts, has found a way of making that ending less final. The summer keeps re-entering the world. Small new pieces of it keep appearing. The kids on the screen are still leaving on the bus at the end. The kids in the audience are still finding new corners of the world the show built. There is something quietly beautiful in that. Lost media for a show about losing a summer is, in its way, the most appropriate possible form of long-term care. So when you look at all of it together, the pilot and the reel, the unproduced episodes and the planned epilogue, the censored Love God scene and the cut Weirdmageddon song, the deleted Tale of Two Stands Mermaid encounter, and the trimmed sock opera Bipper moments, the Cipher Hunt statue, and the Confusion Hill afterlife, the Journal 3 Blacklight secrets, and the Blacklight edition, the Lost Legends stories and the Anti-Mabel, and the Young Pines brothers, the Book of Bill and its hidden website and its cult lore and its signed copies, the coloring book that vanished and the coloring book that came back, the Disney XD shorts and the partial commentaries, and the social media censorship threads. What you have is not exactly a list of lost things. What you have is a slow, ongoing release of a show that did not stop ending, but that found a way of ending more gently, more gradually, more deeply, over the course of a decade. You have, in other words, exactly the kind of long, quiet finish that Gravity Falls itself was always promising. The show told you the summer was going to end. It also, in its lost media, taught you how to keep finding small pieces of it. The pieces are still being found. The decoding is still going on. The fans are still discovering things in the Book of Bill that nobody else has noticed yet. The Art of Gravity Falls is still being printed for September of this year. The signed Book of Bill copies are still being mailed out. Somewhere in a Disney studio is a folder full of Season 1 deleted scenes that may, one day, finally be released. Somewhere in a writer's archive is the storyboard for the cut Bipper scene from Sock Opera. Somewhere in a hard drive is a piece of dialogue from the Love God Diner that has not been seen since 2015. Somewhere in a forest in California, Bill Cipher is still standing inside Confusion Hill with a hat that needs replacing every few years. It is all there. It is just spread out. It is the show as a slow, gentle, careful kind of release that, by its very nature, requires you to be patient. The summer is still slowly ending, in slow, careful pieces, and the show is still slowly finishing, even now. There is one more piece of small lost media we should sit with before we close out, because it is one of the strangest little corners of the show's history. The very first version of the Gravity Falls theme song that anyone ever heard was not the one that Brad Breek eventually composed. It was, as far as fans have pieced together, a song written by Neil Cicierega, a musician and animator whose work has run alongside the show's orbit for years, and whose sister Emmy wrote some of the show's tie-in coloring book content. Neil Cicierega wrote a theme song for the show's pitch, and that song was used during very early presentation work. The song did not end up being used as the show's actual theme. By the time the show went into production, Hirsch had brought on Brad Breek and the eerie wordless choir version of the theme that we all know had been written. The Cicierega version was set aside. In a small act of preservation, Neil Cicierega himself posted the unused intro song on Tumblr, by most accounts in July of 2012, a few weeks after the show actually premiered. So technically the unused theme song is not lost media. You can still find it if you look. But it lives in a corner of the internet that very few casual fans ever wander into. The song was later remixed into a track called Moon's Request, which Cicierega included as a bonus track on his album Spirit Phone. So the unused theme song has had a small afterlife. Cicierega also made other theme songs for the show in alternate versions, none of which ended up being used. Together, those small unused pieces of music are a tiny archive of how different the show might have sounded if a different musician had ended up with the job. It is fitting that a show so often associated with hidden music, with theme song cryptography, with whispered words in the credits, would have a quiet little graveyard of unused theme songs of its own. The show as broadcast has an opening theme that contains a hidden whispered word at the end of each rendition. The hidden word changes across the run of the show. The show's fan community decoded those whispered words very early on. The fact that the show would build that kind of cipher culture into its theme song from the first episode is a sign of how much the show was always going to be about details. The unused theme songs are the negative version of that fact. They are the songs that did not have ciphers hidden in them, because they were never used. The Weirdmageddon block in Season 2 also features a deliberately corrupted version of the theme song. The opening sequence is itself reanimated, with the show's various small visual cues replaced with apocalyptic imagery. The town is in ruins. The mystery shack is being warped. The book is on fire. The corrupted theme is a piece of formal songwriting that the show did to mark the descent into the finale. It is not lost media. It is right there in the aired episodes. But it is worth mentioning here, because it stands as the show's deliberate self-mutilation of its own theme, an acknowledgement, in the show's own musical grammar, that things have changed. The corrupted theme is the show enacting its own decay. There is also, briefly, the matter of the formal episode structure that the show used. Most Gravity Falls episodes are about 22 minutes long, the standard Disney Channel double-block format. A handful of episodes, notably Northwest Mansion Mystery and the Weirdmageddon block, use shortened versions of the theme song so that the longer special episodes can fit additional content. The fact that the longer episodes had to compress the theme is itself a small piece of trivia. The show's tight format meant that every minute had to be fought for. That fight is part of why so much of the show's cut content exists in the first place. The episodes are short, the stories are dense, the cuts are constant. The result, on screen, is dense. The result, in the archive, is a long graveyard of small, beautiful pieces of writing that never had the room to live. One more category of small lost media that deserves a mention, because it is closely tied to the show's culture of ciphers, is the secret content embedded in the show's various promotional materials. The show's official posters, its Disney Channel ad campaigns, its press releases, all contained their own hidden ciphers across the run of the show. Fans collected these and decoded them. Many of those promotional materials are no longer easily accessible, because the websites that originally hosted them have changed, because the Disney Channel ad campaigns have aged out, because the show's official social media accounts have been quietly retired. The text of the ciphers in those promotional materials lives mostly in the fan record. They are a piece of partial lost media that the audience has carried forward. The Gravity Falls cipher culture, in its broadest sense, is itself an act of preservation. The fans have, across the run of the show and the decade since it ended, built a parallel archive of every decoded message, every hidden symbol, every credit cipher, every promotional material puzzle, every Book of Bill website unlock. That archive lives on the wiki. It lives on Tumblr. It lives in subreddits. It lives in personal Google Docs that fans have built and shared. It is, in a way, the show's most distinctive form of cultural artifact. The show built ciphers because it trusted the audience would decode them. The audience built archives because they trusted the show would keep building ciphers. The cooperation has lasted longer than the show. There is something quietly comforting in that. The show that you might have grown up with, or the show that you might be discovering for the first time, has been quietly being kept alive by a community of strangers for a decade. Every time a new piece of Gravity Falls lost media surfaces, somebody adds it to the archive. Every time a writer posts a deleted storyboard, somebody saves it. Every time Hirsch tweets a new piece of internal Disney correspondence, somebody screen caps it and reposts it in 3 different places so it cannot disappear. The show is not the kind of media that is in danger of being forgotten, even though almost nothing about it is being produced new and on schedule. The show is in danger of being remembered too well, of being curated and recurated until every small piece of it has its own footnote. Even the smallest pieces of cut content from the early episodes have, over the years, been documented and discussed. The cut moments from Headhunters about the Wax Museum security guard, the cut conversations in Bottomless Pit, the cut early sequences in Dreamscaperers, the first Bill Cipher episode, where additional moments of Bill's introduction were considered and rejected. The cut moments in Boss Mabel, and in Boys Crazy, and in Carpet Diem, and in Fight Fighters. None of these are central. None of these would change the show's meaning if they were released. But all of them are documented somewhere. The show has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb. The combing continues. The community is endlessly patient. The lost media, in this show's case, is not really lost. It is partially distributed and gently held by the fan community, who, like Dipper himself, are constantly looking for one more clue. Even outside the show's formal canon, fans have built whole tributes to the lost material. There are reconstructions of the unaired pilot that are made for fan study. There are fan-edited versions of the Weirdmageddon block that splice the cut live-action material back in. There are fan attempts to write what the unproduced Wendy's on the Road episode would have been like. There are fan attempts to script the lost epilogue with Blendin. None of those fan-made artifacts are canon. None of them count as Gravity Falls. But they sit in a strange orbit around the show. They are the audience filling in the lost media themselves. Sometimes very well, sometimes only with affection. They are the show's lost media being grieved by the people who care about it most. There is one specific further detail from the Book of Bill's secret site that is worth mentioning before we close, because it is a beautiful little moment of meta-commentary built into the show's own ongoing lost media campaign. When fans first cracked the password and unlocked the original countdown timer, the countdown showed, by most accounts, a target date of July 30th, 2024. The countdown ran for a number of days. Fans waited. Many of them, by their own accounts, were almost certain that the countdown would end with an announcement of a new season of Gravity Falls. There were rumors. There was a feeling, in the fan community, that this might finally be the moment when the show would come back. The countdown reached 0. The website refreshed. And what fans saw, instead of a Season 3 announcement, was a message, "Reading time is dead and meaning has no meaning," with the countdown now reading the word "now." The page then turned into an under-construction screen, featuring Seuss trying to fix some wires. Eventually, the site evolved into an interactive scene of a desk facing a window looking out onto the Mystery Shack. That move, in its way, is one of the most quietly painful little tricks the show has ever played on its fans. The site set up a countdown that looked like it might be the end of a long wait. The countdown ended in a Bill Cipher joke about the death of time. The expected announcement did not arrive. The fans had been, in a sense, played by Bill himself. The site then unfolded, slowly, into a longer ongoing campaign of additional content. The ARG continued. The lost files continued to surface in pieces. The relationship between the audience and the show became, once again, a relationship in which the show would not give the audience what they thought they wanted, but would give them something else instead. That something else is, in the end, the closest thing to a Season 3 that Gravity Falls is likely to ever produce. It is the ongoing slow surfacing of canonical material in puzzle form. It is the continuing decoding work. It is the small drip of new lore through the Book of Bill's site and through Hirsch's social media and through the eventual publication of The Art of Gravity Falls. It is a kind of small, ongoing performance that the show is putting on for the fans who are still paying attention. The show is not coming back as a new season. The show is coming back as a series of slowly revealed lost files, of Cipher unlocks, of countdowns that end in jokes, of side stories about cults in the 1950s, of small Christmas-themed email drops from the show's team, of signed copies that arrive in the mail. That is, in its way, the perfect Gravity Falls afterlife. The show is too distinct, too well written, too carefully built to be revived as a normal television sequel. The fan community is too invested in the show's specific tone to accept a casual continuation. So the team has chosen something else. They have chosen the slow leak, the slow patient release of small new pieces of canon, the slow encouragement of the audience to keep digging, the slow stewardship of the show's lore by Hirsch and his collaborators across years rather than across episodes. And underneath all of it is the same beat the show has always been built on. The summer is ending. Something small and good is going to be over. We are going to have to leave. Lost media, in this show's case, is the show enacting that beat one more time, in a slightly different register, on a different timeline. The 40 episodes are the summer. The lost media is the slow, long autumn that comes after. The autumn is not as bright as the summer. The autumn does not contain new episodes, new adventures, new opening themes. The autumn contains, instead, the careful, slow remembering of the summer. It contains the things you missed. It contains the things that were almost there. It contains the things that you can still find if you know how to look. There is a particular set of small details, scattered through the show, that the fan community has dragged into the light over the years, and that are themselves a sort of distributed lost media. The show's animators were notorious for hiding small details in backgrounds, in single-frame moments, in the corners of shots. Those details were not meant to be the main attraction of any episode. They were meant to be the kind of thing you would notice on a second or third or 10th viewing. Across the run of the show, fans cataloged them obsessively. There are hidden symbols of the Zodiac in backgrounds. There are hidden references to Bill in posters in Mabel's room. There are hidden cipher messages in cereal boxes on the table in the Mystery Shack kitchen. There are hidden faces in trees and establishing shots of the woods. The fan-collected archive of those background details runs to thousands of individual cataloged frames. Each one is, in a very specific sense, a piece of content that the show put on screen for a fraction of a second and trusted somebody, somewhere, to find. The frames are not lost media in the traditional sense. They were broadcast, but they are also not, in any meaningful way, content that the average viewer ever saw. They are a kind of dispersed treasure that the show buried inside its own broadcast for the people willing to do the work. That practice, the hiding of small details in shots, is itself an act that the show inherited from older animation traditions. There is a long line of animated children's shows that include small jokes or references in their backgrounds, going back to the Looney Tunes shorts and forward through The Simpsons and Animaniacs. What Gravity Falls did, that earlier shows did not quite do in the same way, was to make the hunting of those small details part of the show's actual narrative. The show is about a kid who reads a journal that asks him to look more carefully than other people look. The show puts hidden things in its own shots to test whether the audience is the same kind of viewer. The viewer who notices the small things is in some sense aligned with Dipper. The viewer who does not is, in the show's gentle way, more aligned with Stan, who in the show's first season pointedly does not look too closely at anything. The show is rewarding a specific kind of attention. The hidden details are the reward. That reward structure has a small cost. There are details in the show that almost nobody has ever caught. There are jokes that the writers placed in single frames and that have, 10 years later, still not been documented in any wiki. There are frames in the show that almost certainly contain a cipher or a symbol or a Bill reference that nobody outside the studio has noticed. Those frames are, in a very precise sense, lost media inside aired content. They exist on the broadcast. They are there. They have not been seen by anybody who is looking for them. They will eventually, almost certainly, be found, because the fan community has been combing the show for 10 years and is still finding new details. But until they are found, they sit inside the show as small, dormant pieces of content. The show has its own dark matter. There is a similar small body of background detail in the credits sequences. The end credits of each episode contain not only the ciphers we have already discussed, but also small visual gags. There is a credit sequence in which a single frame of background graffiti contains a cipher in the show's own language. There is a credit sequence in which the color of a single object is significant to the broader theme of the season. There is a credit sequence in which a small image in the corner foreshadows an event that happens many episodes later. The fan community has documented many of these. There are almost certainly more that nobody has noticed. The credits, in this sense, are a partially explored archive. There is a whole subgenre of fan video essay that is dedicated to walking through the credit sequences in order and pulling out small details that earlier fan documentation missed. This kind of granularity has another consequence, which is that the fan community has become exceptionally good at noticing changes between versions of episodes. The show's episodes have, over the years, been broadcast on different platforms, in different aspect ratios, in different cuts. There are slight differences between the original Disney Channel broadcasts and the later Disney Plus uploads. There are differences between the Disney XD broadcasts of the second half of Season 2 and the later home releases. There are regional differences, like the Philippines edit of Seuss and The Real Girl that we mentioned earlier. There are differences between subtitle tracks. There are differences between the audio mixes on different releases. All of those differences are documented somewhere by somebody. The fan community is the show's archival redundancy. The studio has its master copies. The community has documented the differences between every version that has been released. This is the same community that, in 2024, immediately documented every page of the Book of Bill within hours of its release. The same community that, in 2025, photographed every page of the re-released Don't Color This Book and compared it to scans of the original to document the differences. The same community that, when the unaired pilot and the Next Time On reel were released in high definition in April 2024, frame by frame compared the new releases to the earlier lower resolution versions to document what had been changed in the upscaling. The fan community is, in a very real sense, the show's external preservation system. The studio could lose the master tapes tomorrow, and the show, in all of its versions, would survive, because so many fans have preserved so many copies. That fact is itself one of the small, comforting truths about a show that is otherwise so much about loss. The show is about ephemera. The show is about things that vanish. The summer ends. The journals are destroyed and reconstructed. The portal closes. The statue freezes. The kids leave. And yet, in the strange way of modern media, the show itself is more preserved than almost any other work in its category. There is no risk of losing Gravity Falls. There is, instead, a continuous slow risk of losing small pieces of the show that the studio has not bothered to formally release. Those pieces are the ones the community keeps reaching for, year after year, decade after decade. The community has decided that nothing will be lost. The community is making good on that decision. A small part of that work in recent years has been the documentation of the show's behind-the-scenes audio recordings that have never been formally released. There are several panels at conventions over the years, including at MomoCon and at San Diego Comic-Con and at Pixelatl, where Hirsch has shared small pieces of audio from the show's archives. There are recordings of voice acting sessions that have surfaced briefly and then disappeared. There are recordings of music recording sessions. There are recordings of the writer's room in action that have been mentioned in interviews. None of those recordings have been formally released. They sit in the studio. Some of them, presumably, will eventually surface. Some of them probably will not. They sit in the same category as the unreleased journals and the partial uncensored commentaries. They are future lost media. They are content that has been confirmed to exist and that has not been made available, and that, if the studio does not release it, will continue to sit unseen. There is also a small body of lost media that relates to the show's voice cast. The cast of Gravity Falls, by general agreement, was one of the strongest voice ensembles in modern animation. Jason Ritter as Dipper, Kristen Schaal as Mabel, Alex Hirsch himself as Stan and Seuss, and Old Man McGucket, Linda Cardellini as Wendy, J.K. Simmons as Ford, Thurup Van Orman as Gideon, The recording sessions were, by various accounts and interviews, often very loose. The actors would improvise. They would suggest alternate takes. They would record alternative line readings that did not end up in the final cut. Several of those alternate takes have been mentioned in commentaries. None of them, so far as is publicly documented, have been formally released. The aired version of the show contains the best takes. The recording archive presumably contains hours of alternative readings that have not been heard outside the studio. Each of those alternative readings is, in a small way, a version of the show that almost happened. The way Seuss says a particular line in the aired version is one specific take chosen out of a larger pool. The pool itself is lost media. The same is true for the show's score. Brad Breek composed not only the theme song but the show's entire underscore, and the score, by Breek's own description in interviews, was the result of a great deal of experimentation. There are alternate cues, alternate orchestrations, alternate melodies that were considered and that did not make it into the final mix. Some of them have been released formally. The Gravity Falls soundtrack album, which was released by Disney Music in 2017, contains a selection of the music from the show, but not all of it. There are cues in the aired episodes that have never been released as separate audio tracks. There are alternate versions of cues that were considered and dropped. There are short pieces of music that were written for moments that were ultimately cut from the show. All of those pieces sit in Breek's archive. They are the show's musical lost media. They are not formally available. There is also, in the recording archive, a small piece of trivia about Kristen Schaal and the role of Mabel that fans have catalogued. Schaal, who voiced Mabel across the entire run of the show, recorded a substantial amount of additional dialogue and improvised material that did not end up in the aired episodes. Mabel, as a character, was substantially shaped by Schaal's improvisation. The aired episodes contain the best of those improvisations. The recording archive contains the rest. There are, by various accounts, alternate versions of Mabel's lines that, if released, would constitute a kind of alternate Mabel reading of the show. Fans have for years asked for access to that material. It has not, so far, been released. Similar things are true for Hirsch himself, who not only created the show and wrote much of it, but voiced two of its most distinctive characters, Stan and Seuss. Hirsch's recording sessions for the show are, by various reports, the source of an enormous amount of cut material. Hirsch would record many takes of any given line, often improvising in the voice of Stan or in the voice of Seuss as he went. The aired episodes contain the best of those takes. The cut takes sit in the archive. Some of them have been released as small bonus features on the box set. Most of them have not. There is, in a very specific sense, an entire body of Stan and Seuss improvisation that the audience has never heard. The version of Stan that exists in the aired show is the surviving version of a much larger archive of Stan that lives in the recording studio. If you sit with that fact for a while, it has its own quiet weight. The Stan you know is the version of Stan that the producers decided was the best version. There is a version of Stan that you do not know, sitting in folders, in different takes, in different reads. That Stan is, in a sense, lost media too. He is real. He was recorded. The audience has not heard him. Some of him might eventually surface. Most of him probably will not. He sits alongside the Bipper that was almost in sock opera, the Bill that was almost given a song in Weirdmageddon, the Wendy that was almost given an On the Road episode, the Pacifica that was almost in the Lost Legends comic in a slightly different form, the Mabel that exists in alternate Schaal, takes nobody outside the studio has ever heard. All of them are versions of the show that almost were. The story of Gravity Falls, when you walk through its lost media in detail, is in some ways the story of a show that was almost 2 or 3 different shows. It is the show as broadcast. It is the show as written before broadcast. It is the show as imagined before that. It is the show as developed in the unaired pilot. It is the show as pitched in the Next Time On reel. It is the show as it would have been with the unproduced epilogue and the unproduced Wendy episode, and the unproduced Silence of the Hams, and the Bill summoning Double Dipper. It is the show as it would have been with the Love God scene intact and the cut Weirdmageddon song included, and the extended live-action sequence preserved. It is the show as it continues to exist in the books and the websites and the unlocks. All of those shows are partially overlapping. None of them is the only Gravity Falls. The show that aired is the show that we all agree to call Gravity Falls. It is the show that is the cultural object. It is the show that is on Disney Plus and on Blu-ray. But the lost media around it is real, and it is, in a strange way, equally Gravity Falls. The show is, in the same way that a person is a sum of all the versions of themselves that almost were, the sum of every version of itself that almost existed. The aired version is the center. The lost versions are the periphery. The periphery is, by sheer volume, larger than the center. That is, in the end, what Gravity Falls Lost Media is for. It is for the slow, patient, gently melancholic act of remembering that the show was, and is, and continues to be, more than it was ever quite allowed to be. The show is bigger than its 40 episodes. The cut content is the proof of that. The lost material is the proof of that. The pilot and the reel and the cut songs and the deleted scenes and the unpublished journals and the hidden book passages and the planned epilogue and the censored love scene and the buried statue and the secret website are all proof of that. Some of it aired, some of it did not. The part that did not air is, in its way, just as much a part of the show. It is just held more quietly. It is more diffused. It is more carefully tended. It is, in a sense, the part of Gravity Falls that you and the rest of the fans are slowly carrying. You can sit with that as you fall asleep. You can sit with the strange little detail that, somewhere in California, in a roadside attraction called Confusion Hill, there is a plexiglass statue of a triangular demon that fans of a Disney Channel show built and hid and found in a forest in Oregon, and that now lives, with a refreshed top hat, as part of a tourist trap. You can sit with the strange detail that there is a coloring book about a cursed coloring book that was discontinued and then was brought back. You can sit with the strange detail that there is a website called thisisnotawebsited.com that contains layers of secret canonical material gated behind a passphrase from The Great Gatsby. You can sit with the strange detail that there are 2 unpublished journals in the show's canon that nobody outside the writer's room has ever seen. You can sit with the strange detail that, somewhere in the show's archive, there is a song called It's Gonna Get Weird that was meant